Cultfigga TV. Revolutionary salute. Revolutionary salute. Like, share, subscribe. Welcome to the House of Revolution. You know I'm your humble host, the Yao Mean of Revolution. World War III is here. World War III is here. Trump orders full blockade of Venezuela. Oh, that's an act of war. Before we get into that, be sure to wipe your feet. That means hit the like button. You in the House of Revolution. Like, share, subscribe, support the platform, y'all. Let's get right into it. World War III is at our doorsteps.
President Trump is now taking the already boiling tension with the Venezuelan president to a new level now, ordering a, quote, total and complete blockade on sanctioned oil tankers in and out of Venezuela. He says that's going to be backed by a, quote unquote, armada of U.S. ships in the region. The specific wording of Trump's announcement may allow for more wiggle room than his blockade threat suggests, but he's definitely trying to escalate things even further. It comes after the U.S. Coast Guard seized this ship. We've been showing you this video since last week off of Venezuela's coast. The new threat is now intended to hit right at the heart of the Venezuelan economy, its massive oil reserves. The president, it appears, is also trying to turn the focus back to the Caribbean and back to his agenda, announcing a primetime speech from the White House tonight. One thing he's likely trying to turn the focus away from, that explosive Vanity Fair interview with his chief of staff, Susie Wiles. People still trying to wrap their heads around what was said on the record in this lengthy series of interviews. One of the more and many eyebrow-raising things about what that was said was about those strikes on alleged drug boats off the coast of Venezuela. The Trump administration has maintained that those strikes are aimed at stopping drugs from reaching the United States. But Susie Wiles says on the record now that they're more about the country's leader, saying that Trump, quote, wants to keep on blowing boats up until Maduro cries uncle. CNN's Elena Treen is live at the White House for us this morning. About that blockade, what are you hearing?
Yeah, and what a stunning quote that was from Susie Wiles, particularly as someone who's been covering this Venezuela escalation for weeks now. I mean, to have the White House chief of staff say that on the record is pretty remarkable, given it's very different, Kate, from what we have heard from officials maintaining that this is all about trying to stop the flow of drugs into the U.S. But to get back to your initial question, President Trump designated Venezuela a foreign terrorist organization on Tuesday. And as you mentioned, he also formally ordered a blockade of all U.S. sanctioned oil tankers that are servicing Venezuela. Now, this is a major escalation and backed, as the president argues, by a giant U.S. armada. And it puts unprecedented pressure on Nicolas Maduro and his regime. A key question, of course, is what will the real impact of this be? I think there's no question that it will hit their already very struggling economy especially hard and could threaten to actually bankrupt Venezuela. But I want to read for you some of what the president posted overnight. He said, quote, Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before, until such time as they return to the United States of America all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. Now, I should say, Trump incorrectly argued that they have stolen a lot of oil and resources from them. That's not necessarily true. We have reached out to clarify those remarks. Venezuela and the Maduro regime is also hitting back very hard. They're arguing essentially that this is showing the real threat or real trying to goal of the president, which they are arguing is to steal the wealth of the country. So a major escalation here of what we are seeing from the president toward Venezuela.
Joining us now is CNN military analyst and retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. Appreciate you being with us.
Oh, it's good to be with you, Rosemary.
So, Colonel, on Monday night, the Pentagon struck 3 more alleged drug boats in the Eastern Pacific. And then on Tuesday, an interview with Vanity Fair has President Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, revealing that these strikes were less about drugs and more about regime change, saying that Trump, quote, wants to keep on blowing boats up until President Nicolas Maduro cries uncle. And people way smarter than me on that say that he will, unquote. What's your reaction to this?
Well, I don't think that hitting these alleged drug boats is going to do the trick. If the effort is going to be focused on regime change, what really needs to happen is they need to go after much bigger fish, figuratively speaking, of course. And what I'm talking about there, of course, would be something like the oil tankers. And so there is a distinct possibility that, based on the president's Truth Social posting and some reporting, the distinct possibility is that he's going to go after the oil tankers. So basically, like that operation a few days ago that netted the large oil tanker that was flying the Guyanese flag, that is the kind of thing that we can expect to see. And if he's going to really blockade Venezuela, and specifically with the purpose of going after those oil tankers, that would be more likely to create the conditions for regime change. It's definitely not a guarantee that it would happen, but it's certainly much closer to achieving that goal as opposed to going after the small alleged drug vessels.
Right. And what is your view of that strategy, the regime change?
Well, I don't think it is the smartest thing to do at this point in time. I think there are a lot of other things that can be done when it comes to Venezuela, but there is certainly one aspect of it is certainly in Trump's camp, and that is the fact that Maduro lost an election, a popular election, and in that sense, he's illegitimately the president of Venezuela right now. So to effectively remove him is not a bad idea, but it should be done by the Venezuelan people. They are the ones that should be taking this into their hands and creating conditions where Maduro leaves.
And Colonel, also on Tuesday, Senate Democrats are angry after attending a classified briefing with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Secretary of State Marco Rubio, where they declined to show senators the unedited video of that controversial second strike on an alleged drug boat in the Caribbean on September 2nd that targeted 2 survivors. What's your response to their refusal to release this controversial footage?
I think it's a big mistake. Now, I think what the administration is looking at is the possibility that if they do release the video, it could potentially lead to everybody, or at least many viewers, looking at it and saying there were, in fact, war crimes committed. So the administration is trying to avoid that. And one of the key tells in this particular case is the fact that they changed their policy when it came to survivors, and they had a few of them a few weeks later, and those 2 that we know about, at least, were repatriated to their countries, in this case, Colombia and Ecuador. So it's pretty clear to me that they didn't want to have survivors and really had no contingency plans for survivors, but that was a direct violation not only of the laws of war, but also of maritime laws. So that puts the administration in quite a bind, actually.
And Colonel, what more are you learning about Hegseth's plans for major power shifts within the US military that, if adopted, would aid other efforts by the Trump administration to move resources away from the Middle East and Europe and apparently reduce the number of generals? What's this all likely to accomplish as well?
Yeah, so this is a very interesting development, and of course they'll tell you that it's a pre-decisional phase that they're going through right now, so they haven't made a final decision. But if they actually decide to reduce the number of 4-star slots that are 4-star general slots that are slated to command the unified commands, such as European Command, African Command, Central Command that's responsible for the Middle East, and similar commands, that really creates a problem, because it's really important for us to have a handle on what's going on regionally in each of those areas. And Europe, of course, is critical at this particular point in time, as is the Middle East. And if we withdraw from those areas, as well as Africa, that's going to create a real problem.
All right, we'll see what happens there. Colonel Cedric Layton, thank you so much for joining us.
Trump has ordered a total and complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers entering and leaving Venezuela as the U.S. ramps up pressure on the government of Nicolas Maduro. The blockade comes amidst a major U.S. military buildup in the region and days after the U.S. seized an oil tanker filled with Venezuelan oil. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, quote, Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before, unquote. Since September, the U.S. military has also carried out at least 25 airstrikes on alleged drug boats without offering evidence in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific near Venezuela, killing at least 95 people. On Tuesday, Vanity Fair published excerpts of bombshell interviews with Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, in which she suggested the aim of the boat strikes is to topple Maduro. Wiles said, quote, Trump wants to keep on blowing boats up until Maduro cries uncle, and people way smarter than me on that say that he will, unquote. On Tuesday, President Maduro denounced the U.S. actions.
We tell the people of the United States our truth, and it is very clear. Imperialism and the Nazi fascist right wing want to colonize Venezuela to take our wealth, oil, gas, gold, iron, aluminum, and other minerals. We have sworn to defend our homeland, and in Venezuela, peace will always prevail, along with stability and shared happiness for our people. To the people of the United States, we say again and again, 1,000 times.
No blood for oil. No war for oil. Eso del narcotráfico.
The claims about drug trafficking are fake news, a lie, an excuse. Since they cannot accuse us of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons, or nuclear missiles, they invent another pretext to create another Afghanistan, another Libya. And with moral authority and with God's blessing, I say,
no more Vietnam, no more Afghanistan, no more Libya, no more Iraq. No more war eternal. No, 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 and no.
We know we are morally and spiritually in the right.
We're joined now by the Pulitzer Prize-winning historian, Yale University professor Greg Grandin. His latest book, America, A New History of the New World. He has a recent piece in the New York Times headlined, Trump's dated strategy is putting us on a path to World War III. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Professor Grandin. Can you start off by responding to what's happening right now? We are doing this broadcast before President Trump makes his address to the nation tonight. Unclear what that's about. But talk about the latest developments with Venezuela.
Well, it is an unprecedented military buildup. It's probably bigger than what the Spanish Empire sent to retake Spain in the 1820s in terms of sheer destructive force. And the classification of fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction and all sorts of presidential announcements that, trying to lay a legal justification for this. And of course, as this is going on, they're still blowing up speedboats in the Caribbean and the Pacific. And as you mentioned, Susan Wiles, the secretary, the chief of staff of Trump, said that this had nothing to do with narco-terrorism, that Trump actually doesn't really care about narco drugs coming into the country. This is really just setting up and hoping to induce a regime change in Venezuela. And Venezuela is really just the first step. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State from Florida, from South Florida, whose family is not itself is not uninvolved in drug trafficking, sees it in very ideological terms. He's Cuban, and for whatever reason, they see Venezuela as the first step of finally bringing down the Cuban Revolution and bringing Cuba back into the orbit of the United States. And then from there, of course, it's Nicaragua. And we just saw this election in Chile, which I know you're going to talk about later with Ariel Dorfman. But Latin America really is on a kind of knife's edge between the left and the right. We see in Argentina, Javier Milei, and what the United States is willing to do to keep him in power. Billions and billions of dollars, not just through the Treasury Department, but also through the IMF to prop up the peso. Honduras, there's all sorts of machinations going on there in terms of the election that the U.S. was involved in, and so that really leaves Latin America divided, almost unprecedentedly divided. In the past, Latin America tended to be coherent, and I tend to be all dictatorships or all kind of center-left presidents. And now we have a continent that's split angularly down the middle. And the image is quite stark. You have Brazil and you have Mexico. And those are the two bulwarks of Latin America. And ultimately, if you're going to get Latin America under control and back under the U.S.'s umbrella, you have to confront those two countries. Ultimately, that is the end goal. And this is in the larger context of a dramatic reversal of U.S. foreign policy. The total renunciation of liberal internationalism. Now, liberal internationalism as an ideal, there was a big gap between in practice and as it actually functioned. But the idea was that the United States would superintend a world governed by common laws. The Trump administration announced in its national security strategy document, which it put out last week or a couple of weeks ago, that the bipartisan consensus that came out of the Cold War has failed. And it had been essentially announced implicitly that what it sees as replacing it is a Monroe Doctrine for the entire world. The way the United States acted with impunity to seize, to kill, and to sanction, it could do anywhere.
Which brings us to what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth just said at the Reagan Defense Forum. He said, quote, "The Monroe Doctrine is in effect."
After years of neglect, the United States will restore U.S. military dominance in the Western Hemisphere. We will use it to protect our homeland and access to key terrain throughout the region. We will also deny adversaries' ability to position forces or other threatening capabilities in our hemisphere. Past administrations perpetuated the belief that the Monroe Doctrine had expired. They were wrong. The Monroe Doctrine is in effect, and it is stronger than ever under the Trump corollary. A common sense restoration of our power and prerogatives in this hemisphere, consistent with U.S. interests.
That was Defense Secretary Hegseth. I wanted to ask you, though, Greg, Latin America is not the same region that it was 100 years ago or that it was 50 years ago. And when you mentioned this split in the region, I'm not so sure I agree with you on that. Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia are the three largest nations in Latin America. They have half the population of the entire region. And all three of those countries are being led still by progressive, left-wing oriented presidents. None of them are going to back a U.S. Invasion, not to mention some of the smaller countries like Cuba or Nicaragua. And so we're in a situation where the United States is trying to impose a past that no longer exists. I'm wondering what you think, even if the intervention were to occur, and it seems likely that's going to happen just in time to eclipse any news of the release of the Epstein files, the ability of the United States to impose its chosen leader on Venezuela is going to be severely restricted, not only by the international condemnation, but also by the fact that the Venezuelan military has been politicized directly over years now as a result of the Chavez revolution. So they're not likely just to lay down their arms and allow the U.S. to come in.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and that's what I meant, that the region was split, and that in Mexico and Brazil, if they're not isolated, then there is no kind of broader U.S. hegemony over the region, and certainly Colombia also, although there's elections coming up in Colombia, and that country is going to be in play, but I think Mexico and Brazil are secure for now, but. Yes, and then
see, Mexico is shaking in their boots because Trump just labeled fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction yesterday. That's a very dangerous thing he did, and it's to put Mexico on notice. They destroyed Iraq over allegations of weapons of mass destruction. He just classified fentanyl or a weapon of mass destruction like a nuclear bomb. So that he did that so Mexico stay in their place while he go to war with Venezuela, because if he's saying, and they got the evidence, the fentanyl is coming out of Mexico. He got the evidence about that. So that was to let Mexico know, don't you get beside yourself, or he absolutely will sick the military on Mexico, which all hell will break loose. But they don't care. They love chaos. They thrive with chaos, and they want to steal everybody's money and say it's going towards war.
About Venezuela, it's unclear what the actual action is going to be. I mean, it's just stopping. Just the sanction and blockade on the oil tankers are going to put enormous pressure on Venezuela to, in terms of food, in terms of being able to import food and feed its people, and what kind of disaster that's going to be. The sanctions are already incredibly punishing. That was bipartisan consensus going back decades to even to Obama. We might see some massive show of force, some targeted strikes, but you're absolutely right. Venezuela is not Libya. It's not going to collapse. I think there is a kind of embedded structure that on the one hand there is a radicalized sector of the population. On the other hand, there are there are people invested in a kind of militarized corruption that does structure some of the ways the country is governed, and Maduro could or could not go, but that doesn't necessarily mean the United States is going to have its way and just be able to install a puppet like it did in Chile in '73 or Guatemala in '54 or any number of coups in the past. It's a dangerous game. I was sitting out in the waiting room today, and just now, a second ago, and CNN talked about a second near crash between a private jet and some U.S. military force. I mean, they're really pushing it to the max. Of course, these murders and on the high seas. Now we have an admission from the administration that this is just. This has nothing to do with drugs. It has everything to do with Maduro. These are innocent people. It's like he's like the Red Queen in Alice. You execute, then you have the trial, and then you have the conviction, and then you have the trial. He does everything backwards. We're living in like an Alice in Wonderland foreign policy in Latin America, but Latin America is confused. There's tension within Latin America. Petro said that he wouldn't shake President-elect Cast's hand. This is a Nazi, and he was immediately rebuked by Boris, a center leftist. So there's also a lot of tension within Latin America about how to respond to the United States. That kind of unity that existed coming out of the 2000s, when Chavez was president and Lula was the president in Brazil, and you had Kirchner in Argentina, and you had Bachelet in Chile, and it was a very rhetorically strong and dominant form of social democracy that really commanded the rhetorical field. I think what we're seeing here is a lot of confusion about how to deal with Trump, just like the rest of the world. It is in some ways the madman doctrine of diplomacy, except the madman doctrine was supposed to be a performance, an act. But we actually have a madman in the White House in some ways.
Well, but this whole the issue is clearly the key aspect of this in Venezuela that distinguishes Venezuela from all the other governments that in the region that Trump may not like is these vast oil reserves.
Yeah.
That on the one hand, Could you talk about the importance of these oil reserves and also the fact that the American people, by and large, all the polls indicate they have no interest in the United States launching a war against Venezuela because Venezuela has not posed any threat to the United States.
Yeah, and that's interesting. And it's I think that's one of the reasons why it's taking Trump so long to figure out what to do. He may be a madman, but he's not completely irrational. He does calculate, and there is obviously no bloodthirst within the rank and file of the Trump administration for a ground war in Venezuela, and certainly not within the country as a whole. And so he's responding to that. Then there's the calculus of, well, distraction, the Epstein files. Will this distract, or will people make the connection that we're doing it to distract? And, there's a lot of independent, we've heard about how the Republican ecosphere, information sphere is kind of fracturing and coming apart and eating each other. Venezuela does have oil, but there's lots of ways of getting Venezuela's oil. I mean, Maduro has basically offered it up. Chevron, as we speak, is pumping oil and sending it to Port Arthur in Texas to be processed. There's lots of ways to get control. It doesn't. So a war with Venezuela over oil is an ideological war, and it's led by the Marco Rubio faction, the war party within the Trump administration, that sees Latin America in very ideological terms, in which Venezuela is the first step to contain a left that, yes, is still strong and still, has quite a purchase. I mean, even in Chile, right, 42% of the population voted for a communist woman in one of the most socially conservative countries in Latin America. That's not nothing. I mean, it's a shame we got the Nazi, but 42% of the country voted for Jeanette Jara, who is a communist woman. That speaks, I think, to the strength of the ongoing strength of the left. But there isn't a coherent strategy of how to deal with the United States. I mean, any country going to come to Venezuela's aid to try to get the oil out? I don't think Colombia can risk that. There are ways in which you can imagine Colombia trying to get Venezuela's oil out, but do they want to provoke the United States to that degree? It's a little unclear. So I think everything's up in the air and on the table at this moment. Anything can happen, and I guess things will be clarified by the speech or not.
Thanks for watching Democracy Now! On YouTube. Subscribe to the
was actually filled with fentanyl. That's for Judging Freedom. Today is Wednesday, December 17th, 2025. My dear friend Max Blumenthal joins us now. Max, thank you for being here. Thanks for accommodating my schedule. A couple of topics to get to. Let's start with Venezuela. Wasn't the seizure of the enormous Venezuelan tanker filled with oil in the high seas by the U.S. military an act of piracy?
Well, it's actually filled with fentanyl. That's what I thought.
If you listen to the president, that's what he'll claim. Notwithstanding what his own Drug Enforcement Administration says about Venezuela, which is basically a clean bill.
Seems like an act of piracy to everyone who's paying attention, who knows what piracy is. And it wouldn't have been the first act of piracy and outright theft by the U.S. regime of Venezuelan assets. The U.S. regime used a arcane alter ego legal mechanism to steal Venezuela's most profitable international asset in Citgo, just completely stole it and then plundered the money to fund the coup plotting Venezuelan opposition. Nicolas Maduro's personal airliner was stolen by the Biden administration. And now Trump is announcing a complete blockade of Venezuela, which is an act of war, and the theft of Venezuelan oil from tankers, which he says are sanctioned or illegal. And you have the kind of spook community claiming some kind of legitimacy to this action and asserting, actually, an expert said this in Reuters, that when the US does it, it's not piracy. And to call it piracy is merely rhetoric. But the idea that this is legitimate is based on the US sanctioning during the first Trump administration, Venezuela's entire oil sector. So now Trump has come forward with an announcement that this is the policy going forward, to steal Venezuelan oil, because he claims that Venezuela, in a Truth Social post, he said Venezuela has stolen our oil and land, as though Venezuela actually belongs to the United States. And by being a sovereign nation, they are stealing from us. This is
what is he talking about?
I
Venezuela has stolen our oil and our land. He claims the United States government owns the land of Venezuela.
Yes, that's one of the points that he's making, which even ferocious putschist members of the right-wing Venezuelan opposition who are close to Maria Corina Machado are a little bit embarrassed about, because he's taking their regime change plot to its logical conclusion, which is that the US will control Venezuela completely and steal its land and resources, as the United States has traditionally done to other Latin American countries. And remember, when Trump's close ally, Lindsey Graham, said Venezuela should be the 51st state. This is the thinking that animates Trump's policy. And so Trump has also admitted this has nothing to do with drugs. And you know who else admitted this? Susie Wiles, in a very candid and revealing and now embarrassing interview with Vanity Fair. She said, Trump wants to keep on blowing up boats until Maduro cries uncle. And people way smarter than me say that he will. So it's actually about regime change. And then if you read deeper into Trump's statement on Truth Social, he's classifying fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction, even though Venezuela doesn't produce any fentanyl. And this means that actually the Sackler family are terrorists. He's using this as the WMD justification for the whole policy of theft, plunder, and regime change, as they continue to blow up boats on the fake drug war justification, killing civilians who have no due process.
Chris, now I have to read the Truth Social that you and Max and I discussed before we went on air. Is this the very one you sent me in the email? Okay. This is the President of the United States. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever amassed in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before, until such time as they return to the United States of America. Here you go, Max. All of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. For the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. Therefore, today I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent to the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation, and likewise will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter, Donald J. Trump. These are the ravings of a madman. There's no evidence for any of this.
No, there isn't. I mean, the only force that he seems more hostile to in the Western Hemisphere is Rob Reiner. This is a deeply deranged individual who is having his strings pulled by a zealous, ideologically extreme fifth column in South Florida that is obsessed with regime change. And the foreign terrorist organization authorization is designed to completely skirt Congress and invalidate the Constitution to legitimize this policy. And it's based on absolutely nothing. Venezuela does not threaten the United States in any way, but it's also a designation that was slapped on Cuba to justify indefinitely embargoing and strangling Cuba's economy, and Biden refused to undo that policy. So an act of war is being declared by Donald Trump. When you blockade a country unilaterally and announce a complete cordon sanitaire around the country's borders so that no resources can go in or out, you are declaring war on that country. And now the Trump administration is seeking a pretext for a straightforward military conflict with Venezuela that will have disastrous consequences. If you want to talk about human trafficking, narco cartels, it will unleash civil war. I mentioned before there was this war game back in 2019 overseen by someone named Douglas Farah, who appears to be some US intelligence asset, very closely aligned with the neoconservative camp, had produced many papers for Western intelligence aligned think tanks like the Institute for National Security Studies on how to do regime change in Venezuela. So he's not exactly someone who's in my corner on this issue. And he determined that in a US war with Venezuela, it would unleash a conflict with no end and no possible means of stopping the conflict, something that would be like the Colombian Civil War on steroids. So you hear these characters like Elliot Abrams or the former US fake ambassador to Venezuela, James Story. They're out there promoting this lie that Venezuela is not like Libya or Iraq at all. You don't have these sectarian religious divides. This society has a history of democracy, but they completely ignore the Colombian example in which the US unleashed a civil war through its interventions and meddling starting in the 1950s.
Well, doesn't China buy most of its oil from Venezuela? They probably have a reserve. What happens when they need oil and Trump won't let ships get through the Panama Canal?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, China gets a lot of oil from Iran as well, and China's assisting Iran through infrastructure. They may be selling anti-aircraft weapons and helping Iran on various other financial levels. When I was in Iran, I saw that all the construction equipment was from China. Their future was heavily propelled by China, but Venezuela is far away. And that's partly why Trump is behaving so aggressively to Venezuela. Russia is pinned down in Ukraine, and both China and Russia watched as Syria fell. There may have been very little they could do, but Russia had to redeploy many of its strategic bombers and forces that it was using to protect Syria from regime change back to its own front lines to defend against Ukraine's onslaught. So this is a moment of opportunity for the Trump-Rubio clique, especially the Rubio clique. And what can Russia or China do? Russia, I think 2 or 3 years ago, actually sent a couple of strategic bombers all the way from Moscow to Caracas in a message to Washington that it would defend Venezuela against regime change. But it has sent no such message that I've seen since Trump initiated this unprecedented show of force. And I think that's what's needed right now is a very public message.
Here's a public tweet from then Congresswoman and now his Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. This is January 2019. The United States needs to stay out of Venezuela. Let the Venezuelan people determine their future. We don't want other countries to choose our leaders, so we have to stop trying to choose theirs. Boy, that is about as sound and rational and concise a statement as I've heard. I wonder if she still feels that way, Max.
Well, I know Tucker Carlson's coming on next, and you should ask him about this. He might have more insight than I do. What I think these Tulsi Gabbard statements show and exemplify is the corruption of a wing of our national security elite that actually knows better, that knows the truth that we are elucidating right now, but has agreed to sublimate their own views and repress their knowledge to fuel their own ambition. And I think that is why so many are so enraged with Tulsi Gabbard kind of holding the line. At the same time, I don't know what is happening inside the Trump administration, but I've heard from various sources that there is a fight taking place over Venezuela and that Trump is constantly wavering. And I would assume Tulsi Gabbard is on the side of those who are the non-interventionists. The question is, what kind of power does she have when you have someone like Susie Wiles as chief of staff who keeps Tulsi Gabbard and her team out of any important national security related meeting, just as she did during the 12-day war with Iran, where she made sure that the CIA chief, John Ratcliffe, known as the Mossad stenographer, was constantly in the room with Trump feeding him Mossad intelligence. It feels like the same dynamic is at play, where Rubio is controlling everything Trump sees and hears about Venezuela, and the Tulsi faction is frozen out.
This is a brilliant analysis of the dysfunctional government that we have right now. They're probably whispering into his ear that nickname that he despises, Taco. Trump often chickens out, or Trump always chickens out, something like that, because there's no greater insult for him than to think that he chickens out. But he has no basic principles, no set of values. And it is almost literally whoever is whispering in his ear last is determining what he's doing. Does anybody take seriously the allegations that Nicolas Maduro is the head of a drug cartel masquerading as the president of Venezuela? Does anybody take that seriously? Does even Lindsey Graham believe that?
Nobody believes that. I mean, with Susie Wiles' comments to Vanity Fair, with Trump's Truth Social post, if you follow any of the leaders of the Gusano industrial complex, like Representatives Maria Elvira Salazar or Carlos Jimenez, who are helping drive this policy, they always mention drugs as an afterthought. And it's all about either political control, geopolitics, or in Trump's case, oil. I mean, we're talking about $1.7 trillion in oil reserves at a time when global capitalism is in crisis. And Donald Trump is ushering in a new era without institutions, without the mirage of a rules-based order. It is simply turn of the century, high colonial era gangster capitalism with Palantir levels of command and control. And that's what Trump is doing to Venezuela.
Let's switch gears, Max, to this remarkable document that you and I have reviewed, which was filed either yesterday or earlier today by Julian Assange, accusing the Nobel Peace Prize people of committing crimes. What is this all about?
Indeed.
This is remarkable.
It's an explosive document, and it took someone with the integrity and credibility of Assange, who was effectively tortured, persecuted, and hounded and smeared for a decade by the US regime as a political prisoner, to call out Maria Corina Machado. And it took a mind like Assange's to analyze the rules and structure of the Swedish and Norwegian Nobel Committee and Nobel Prize process in countries that in a country, Sweden primarily, that participated heavily in his persecution, to produce this kind of explosive legal brief accusing the Nobel Committee of crimes. They have violated their own stated rules on who is eligible for the Nobel Prize. The rules require that these are people who oppose the increase in standing armies, who are campaigning for peace, and who are pushing diplomacy. And Maria Corina Machado contravenes all of those rules in the most explicit, unprecedented way in Nobel history, with the possible exception of Theodore Roosevelt, who was granted the Nobel Prize despite his warmongering in the Western Hemisphere. And the Nobel Committee on its own website says that it gave that prize to Theodore Roosevelt to curry favor with Washington because the Scandinavians were hungry for soft power. But they're doing it with Maria Corina Machado, a veteran coup plotter who is actually called on Netanyahu and Israel to invade Venezuela, to install her into power. They're doing that with her for the same reason. And who nominated her for the prize? It was Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State. So clearly this is about soft power. But as we illustrate, Wyatt Reed and myself in our analysis that we published at the Gray Zone, there are also serious conflicts of interest between the Nobel Prize Committee and the Venezuelan opposition that I can explain in a minute. But Assange nails the committee for violating its own rules, as well as violating the Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court. The Rome Statute is enshrined into Swedish domestic law, and Sweden's foreign ministry claims to take seriously the Rome Statute. Everything Maria Corina Machado has done and is doing violates the Rome Statute and has already initiated and enacted war crimes in the Caribbean with the killing of over 100 civilians in strikes on boats, including double tap strikes. So the committee members need to be interrogated, they need to be investigated, and this award must not be given because it is illegal according to the laws of the countries that are giving it. Once again, the institutions have no credibility. The rules-based order is unmasked for everyone to see. It's a continuation of the Gaza genocide, illustrating how hollow this transatlantic liberal international order is. And it's all perfectly distilled into this legal brief authored by Julian Assange.
What happens now? I mean, is this the functional equivalent of a criminal complaint? Is somebody going to be charged with violating Swedish law?
It's a criminal complaint that needs to be examined by Swedish judiciary authorities. And if they throw it out, it means that they're throwing out their own laws and their own regard for the Rome Statute that they claim to hold so dear. So that's the choice that Julian Assange has presented them. It's also the choice they made by giving the Nobel Prize to a warmonger and coup plotter who is involved presently in war crimes in the Caribbean, who has never presided over any kind of peace treaty, as Henry Kissinger, for example, did. And you could say, well, Barack Obama didn't deserve the Nobel Prize either. It was a farce, for sure. But Obama had not yet presided over war crimes because of him at the inception of his presidency.
Before we end, let's just go back to Venezuela. What do you think will happen next? Is he going to make some announcement tonight about an invasion? Or is tonight going to be some twisted understanding of the bad economic news that came out yesterday?
I'd expect a lot of bluster about Maduro, a lot of WMD level bluster that the American public has already rejected and will continue to reject. I expect that the more he blusters about Venezuela, the more his approval rating will tumble further below 40%. And that if Trump is wise, he'll try to change the subject because he has lost his luster and he has stumbled into George W. Bush level territory here. Really feels like it's been a long year, and I can't believe we're going to have 3 more years of this. It could lead us to a very dark place.
My views precisely, Max. Max, I know you're traveling, and I deeply appreciate you being on with us. Next week is a short week because of Christmas. I hope you can go back with us one more time before
this Coast Guard team, Marines, Coast Guard, to go and seize this Venezuelan oil tanker. They make this super cool video. This video looks so cool on my Facebook feed, bro. It looks so badass on my Facebook feed, bro. It really, look at those Coast Guard go. This is like Call of Duty. This is like Call of Duty chopper view, sniper view, UAV view. This is so cool. We got the Contra VHS quality for the boomers. This is so cool. This is like complete propaganda because they basically give you the UAV view, they give you like the sniper view. That's for Gen Z, to try and convince Gen Z that this is super badass. You've got the POV like you're in Call of Duty or in COD. And then for the boomers, they put it in the VHS quality to make it look like nostalgic, like old war footage that they've seen when they were younger, when they were in their 30s and whatnot. And how do we know it's like complete, this is theater? Because the Houthis in Yemen have like 8K HD footage as they're seizing the Israeli tankers that are going through the Red Sea. The Houthis in Yemen have like 8D footage from every conceivable angle as they seize their tankers. But the U.S. is trying to convince like boomers and stuff to support the war. 70% of Americans oppose war on Venezuela. 88% of Gen Z opposes war on Venezuela. So they're trying to put out this propaganda stuff to be like, this is so cool, isn't it? I don't know. It's like they're giving this millennial Reich their VHS footage to try and remind them of their youth and make this seem like it's all super cool, bro. This is such an unclassified vibe. Maduro responded to the seizure of this tanker. He said they militarily assaulted and stole a civilian ship, kidnapped its crew, like the Pirates of Caribbean. You know what's funny about this? Like Trump spent the last few weeks talking about Somalis. Said Somalis need to go back to Somalia, but we know they don't want to go back there because there's Somali pirates and it's a shithole country with the Somali pirates. And then 1 week later, he's doing U.S. Coast Guard Somali pirate aesthetics where they're seizing Venezuelan oil tankers as they threaten to launch war on Venezuela over narco trafficking, but they're actually doing Somali
Pirates of the Caribbean in real life.
Pirates of the Caribbean style seizure of giant tankers. It's on. Oh, this is all such a meme. It's so crazy. The U.S. Whatever her name is, Caroline Leavitt, she's through her somehow, some way, through the overpowering force of her 500 Botox injections this week, she is explaining to Fox News that they are going to, in fact, take the oil. The vessel is undergoing a forfeiture process right now. You notice how they make it sound super legal? They're like, well, it's going through the forfeiture process. This is also legal, the forfeiture process. No, you just went down there, Somali pirate style, Houthi Yemen style. They waged a war on Yemen for months on end, bombed countless civilians. I was there in Yemen. I met with the civilians that they were bombing, and they did this under the guise of protecting the free market in the Red Sea because U.S. ships were being stopped in the Red Sea by the Houthis. So now they're just doing the same thing here, but they bombed Yemen for months on end because they did the same thing. Mark Warner, I don't know who this guy is, probably some lib. He said, so they can seize an oil tanker, but not a drug boat. The lib's got a point. He makes a good point. Why can't they seize the drug boats if they can seize a whole tanker? Good point. Also, the U.S. announced new sanctions on Venezuela, on Maduro's nephews and 6 Venezuelan shipping companies. So, it's all legal because they're sanctioning the shipping companies. So it's legal now, right? It's totally normal and legal and not insane. U.S. Admiral Halsey has stepped down. He was the admiral leading U.S. Southcom, which was overseeing the Caribbean operations, Venezuela, Colombia, Trinidad, Tobago, Cuba, so on and so forth. He has officially stepped down on December 12th, yesterday. So this took place the same day that they seized. I guess as soon as he stepped down, they said, okay, well, now he's gone. He probably said something like, if you seize a ship before I resign, I will quit the next day and it will be even more embarrassing for you. So they waited until like the very minute that he resigned, and then they went and seized the vessel and made this VHS tape, stupid video, propaganda video about it. Now, there's a lot of discussion as to why they are doing this. Why now? Why are they doing this? What is going on here? And I want to bring this point to your attention, okay? So this is probably the biggest point of all as to why they're doing this right now. Venezuela, as you know, controls the world's largest oil reserves. They literally make the oil reserves of Saudi Arabia look like peanuts. 85% of Venezuela's oil exports right now are in non-dollar currencies. Venezuela does not export a lot of oil because the U.S. has sanctioned them. They have cut off all possibilities for them to access the necessary chemicals, additives, machinery, so on and so forth to actually process their own oil in mass. So the fear is if Venezuela can process their own oil in mass, this low-grade oil that they can take out of the ground in their country in very large quantities, larger quantities than any country on the earth, and they begin to export that to countries all across the world, it is very likely that the vast majority of that oil will not be going to the United States. Now, the U.S. has allowed Chevron to do business there. They account for 25% of Venezuela's oil exports on a daily basis. And Maduro's been very chill with the idea of giving Chevron and everyone else more oil deals. If it's fair, if it's transparent, if it's equal, they're not getting ripped off in Venezuela. He said, I wish that Chevron could have a 100-year lease to do business in our country. I wish Trump would allow that. But it's the U.S. that is blocking oil companies from doing substantial business in Venezuela, not Maduro. You get the idea here. So if the U.S. continues the blocking of U.S. companies to do business in Venezuela, that oil will be going to other countries. It will be going to China. It will be going to who knows where. It's going to be going to countries like India, who can do non-dollar trade, right? 80% of Venezuela's oil exports today are priced in the petro-yuan. The petro-yuan, not the petrodollar. You see how this is a fear for the United States? You understand that the United States, the first thing that the United States did when we went into Baghdad, we said, all right, we're going to change some that Saddam was doing. We're going to put all of Iraqi oil exports on the petrodollar. Okay, we're gonna add it back to the petrodollar. That was the first executive order that the Bush administration signed when they went into Baghdad. What did we go into Libya for? Can anyone remind me? Oh yeah, it was because Gaddafi was working to build a new Pan-African currency, Pan-African political unity, Pan-African economic unity. So Africa would no longer be subservient to French currencies, to I guess like CFA franc in the case of the Sahel. They would no longer be subservient to the dollar. And that was a big no-no. And the U.S. said, Gaddafi must go. We came, we saw, we conquered. Isn't that what Hillary Clinton said? What was her quote? We came, we saw, we took out Gaddafi, some dumb shit like that. Pokemon went to Libya and destroyed their country. Now they have slave markets. Well, think about this. If they did that because of the threat that Libya posed, if they did that because of the threat that Iraq posed, imagine what they will do to stop Venezuela, the world's largest oil producer, the world's largest oil reserve nation, and what could be the world's largest oil producer if they are allowed to develop in a sovereign manner, what they will do to stop Venezuela from trading their oil in the petro-yuan or doing, Venezuelan currency to rupee currency deals. This is a big no-no for the United States, and they will do anything to stop it. Now, the other thing here is that Venezuela is not a BRICS member. A lot of people think Venezuela is a BRICS member, but actually the U.S. forced Brazil under Lula to block Venezuela from joining as a BRICS member in Kazan, Russia at the 2024 BRICS summit, right? If Venezuela were to become a BRICS member, that would mean that BRICS would then control 67% of the world's oil reserves. If Venezuela joined BRICS, BRICS would control, BRICS and BRICS partners nations would control 67% of the world's oil reserves. Right now, BRICS and the partner states control 50% of the world's oil reserves and output. With Venezuela, it would be 67%, clear majority. And of course, they'd be more inclined to help Venezuela obviously develop the means to process that low-grade oil in that case. But already China is doing that. John Kiriakou describes this threat to the U.S., to the petrodollar, and why the U.S. wants to stop Venezuela from developing their oil resources, their processing, because of the threat it would pose to the dollar. Take a listen to what he has to say here.
I think really what we're seeing here is a slow motion response or a delayed response to China's decision 5 years ago to build an oil refinery in the Caribbean. And the reason I say that is Venezuela has very, very dirty oil. They have an ocean of it, but it's very high in sulfur content, and it needs significant chemical distillation, refining to and you can't even use it to turn into gasoline for your cars. It's mostly made into home heating oil because it's so dirty and high in sulfur. Well, until just
keep in mind, there's a very famous story of when some U.S. cities, impoverished U.S. cities, had like major blackouts during winter. Venezuela, under Hugo Chavez, actually provided energy to those struggling American families for free. That's the type of evil state that Venezuela is, just giving oil to struggling, or giving energy to struggling Americans to help them power their homes in the dead set of winter when they had no energy.
5 or 6 years ago, the only place that you could refine that oil was in Houston, Texas. We built refineries that were specialized just to handle Venezuelan oil. But then, of course, we sanctioned the Venezuelan oil industry. Well, the Venezuelans didn't then just shut down their oil industry. The Indians and the Chinese built new refineries to handle Venezuelan oil, and they shipped the oil there. The Chinese are swimming in money. And so they decided, instead of shipping the Venezuelan oil all the way to China, they'll just build the refinery in the Caribbean, refine it right there, and ship it out from the Caribbean. And the United States doesn't like that. So the bottom line here, I think, is China.
I agree. I mean, there's other reasons. Maria Corina Machado is a raging Zionist. She called on Israel to invade and liberate Venezuela from Maduro. She's the Nobel Peace Prize winner. She's a very big liberal. She wants to put the LGBT values in Venezuela, Catholic country, overwhelming Catholic country. Of course, Venezuela, it's about China, it's about the oil, it's about the petrodollar, it's about all of this stuff. It's about Venezuela simply saying that we want to develop in our own sovereign manner. And if they were allowed to do that without war being thrust upon them, it would succeed, and it would then prompt other countries in Latin America to say, hey, Venezuela is so successful. They are the epicenter of the multipolar civilization of Latin America that is showing true sovereign success, and we want to be a part of that. And then slowly but surely, you have other countries say, hey, United States, we don't want to live we don't want to have your boot on our neck as well. So we're going to do what Venezuela did, one by one, until there's no one left. Okay. That is what is going on here. And that is why Venezuela is a threat, because they said, we're done with the U.S. empire. We're going to go in our own way. We're going to look for our own partners, and we're not going to use the petrodollar in the process. Before you leave, I want to say thank you for the support, because after 2 years of being banned, we are
the show. It's your host, Danny Haifong. As you can see, I am joined by Patrick Henningsen of 21st Century Wire, as well as former CIA analyst Larry Johnson. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me again today. How are you both doing?
I'm well.
Great to be with you, Danny.
Great. Everyone hit the like button as you come on. That helps boost the stream in this conversation as we have it. But let us begin, gentlemen, with the peace deal hysteria. So the Trump administration has said, Donald Trump himself has said that there is peace on the horizon. It's very close. But Vladimir Putin has just recently spoke to the Defense Council in Russia. And I wanted to play what he said because I think it's very instructive as to what Russia's response is, which I believe is quite crushing to this illusion that this peace deal is very close. Here is what he said.
Second,
Sorry, here we go.
in this regard, what can be our goals in terms of military constructions, considering the situation along the line of contact? First, we will definitely achieve the objectives of the special military operation. We would prefer addressing the root causes of this conflict by diplomatic means, but if the other side and its foreign sponsors refuse to move in this way, Russia will liberate its historical lands by military means, creating a buffer safety zone. This is another major objective.
So, how about we begin with you, Larry? What's your assessment of Russia's response to what's been going on between Trump, Europe, Ukraine regarding this peace deal, and your comments on what Vladimir Putin had to say about to the Defense Council?
One word: niet. No. You know, this this chatterbait circle jerk that takes place every time U.S., Europeans, and Zelensky get together, where they're talking to each other, and to have any appropriate engagement, any possibility for a diplomatic solution, Russia's must be involved, and Russia is not. Russia gets consulted, and you know, Putin spends 5 hours trying to explain things to Witkoff and Kushner, but the Russian position has not changed since June 14th, 2024. Prior to that, they were willing to allow Donetsk, Luhansk to remain part of Ukraine. All they were keen on was getting guarantees to protect the rights of Russian speakers and the rights of the Orthodox Church. But under pressure from the West, the Ukrainians blew up that agreement, walked away from it. And so then on June 14th, 2024, Vladimir Putin, speaking to the Russian Foreign Ministry senior personnel, laid it out very clearly. The territories that have voted to become part of Russia, Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia, those are now permanently part of Russia, the Russian Federation, and the West must recognize them as the legal republics of Russia, not just some de facto recognition, but an actual legal acknowledgement. Get all of NATO out of Ukraine, withdraw all Ukrainian troops from Russian territory, which means those 5 former Ukrainian oblasts, and hold elections. Those are the key issues. And Russia has not varied from that. The only variation is Putin and others have basically said, if that deal, which is now on the table, if they don't take that, then as Russia continues to acquire and gain territory in Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Sumy, Poltava, that they will take and keep those territories, or at least give the people inhabiting those territories the chance to vote whether or not to join with the Russian Federation. So it's clear, Russia's not, you know, they haven't changed that position. And this notion that, oh well, we'll convince that if Ukraine agrees just to let Russia have Donbass, you know, Donetsk and Luhansk, that it'll all be settled. No. Kherson, Zaporizhia too. They're not giving that up, and the West refuses to understand that.
Patrick, same question to you. Oh, sorry. Hold on. There you go.
Yeah, go ahead and repeat the question again. I forgot the.
What do you make of Putin's comments, as well as how they fit into this peace deal hysteria that we've been seeing in recent days?
Well, I mean, just to, I think, add a little bit more onto what Larry was saying there. I think Larry outlined the strategic side very, very clearly. I think people need to. The thing that strikes me is, especially people in the West, they need to listen to what that the central complaint by the Russians. He's talking about Putin saying historic Russian lands are going to be liberated. And you have to address this point. You have to recognize what's being said there. Why? How did we get to this point? How did Russia get to the point where it believes that historic Russian lands need to be liberated and repatriated to Mother Russia? And the answer to that question is one of the big points of all of this, how the civil war, I repeat, civil war, began after the Maidan, the US-backed coup in Kiev in February of 2014. A civil war ensued. And the US and European-backed government in Kiev enacted a policy of lustration against the people in mainly Russian speakers in Donetsk and Lugansk, also in Crimea, okay? And also right across the rest of Ukraine, Russian speakers throughout the country of Ukraine. So there was ethnic discrimination based on Russian heritage, Russian identity, Russian language. So ethnic discrimination followed by ethnic violence, organized state violence along ethnic lines, okay, using Nazi and Azov battalion gangs and radical militants, radical Ukrainian nationalists, okay, unleashing those dogs along racial and ethnic lines. So the U.S. has intervened in the past themselves to quell such humanitarian disasters or, you know, launch humanitarian interventions on that basis. So Russia has just done that in February of 2022. And the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, that's even taken things a step further, which is the criminalization of the largest Christian church in the country based on ethnic discrimination or anti-Russian discrimination on the part of the Ukrainian government, fully endorsed and backed by the United States and the European countries. So how this is only going to end one way, and that's obviously we're past civil war now. And people in the West need to realize that throughout history, when there is a violent civil war, no matter what country we're talking about, that is going to ultimately end, or there's a high risk that the country may be broken up as a result. This is not like some major, you know, theoretical physics equation here. This is just basic historical precedent common sense. This is what happens after a violent civil war. And when you add the amount of weapons and money and political capital that's been force-fed into Ukraine to make this happen, then the results are going to be catastrophic. Russia is reacting to this. And it's reacting not only to this, but to then secure its own national security based on this new hyperinflated threat. The Ukrainian military on steroids, pumped with NATO cash, weapons, and political backing from the West, that is a major security threat for Russia, and it has to secure what it needs to do to make sure that its national security objectives are met, that any existential threats on its border or doorstep are not going to will no longer be a threat. So plain and simple. Any other major power would react the same way. That's the conversation Russia's trying to have with the West, but cannot have, because they're with the U.S. Russia's dealing with rank amateurs, a hodgepodge motley crew, Trump's foreign policy team, the main actors of which have no portfolio at all, Steve Witkoff and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. This ad hoc foreign policy, this is not a serious government in Washington. The Trump administration is not a serious organization. You know, if Trump went about his real estate business the way he goes about his international relations, he wouldn't be able to build anything in New Jersey, because he just completely discards law and, you know, precedent, and the bureaucracies in the business world are clear. You can't build a casino in Dubai unless you follow certain processes. But he doesn't want to follow anything in terms of international diplomacy and regards international law as nothing. Look at what they're doing in Venezuela, or look at Gaza, and that shows, or Iran, that shows you where the Trump administration is on international norms and laws. This is not a serious government, the Trump administration internationally, and that's why they're going to fail again and again and again. And I said this a couple weeks ago on a big podcast when the 28-point plan came out. I said, I don't think it's going anywhere because they just have not demonstrated that they're able to execute beyond tweets, beyond perfect phone calls, beyond fake deals that aren't deals. It's like photo ops. That's what this president is good at, but he's not good at executing any major negotiation or agreement. So it's kicked into 2026. We'll have this conversation again in February.
Larry, I'll just pull up how the Western mainstream media has been reacting to Russia's response to all of what you and Patrick have been talking about. Here's The Independent. Moscow refuses to give up land after Trump claims peace deal is closer than ever. And then NBC News, so that was the UK, NBC News in the US said, Ukraine and the US hail major progress in peace talks, but huge hurdles remain, especially not least whether Moscow will once again reject making concessions. What do you make of this narrative? It seems to be pretty entrenched now that it's Russia that's refusing to make concessions to Ukraine, to Washington, to who? But Larry, your reactions.
Well, Russia's not going to make concessions, and Russia doesn't need to make concessions. Russia's not seeking, they're not in a tough place economically or militarily where they're under pressure that, oh my God, we've got to back away from this. If anything, in terms of domestic politics, the Putin's coming under more pressure to be more decisive. I've heard some, fairly prominent Russian soldiers comment that they felt like they've been fighting with their hands tied behind their back, and they want to be loose. They want to be free to pursue this. So again, this is the West just talking to itself and pretending that because they sit down and have a conversation that constitutes progress and negotiations. I had a friend. He was the chief of staff to Barry Goldwater's vice presidential candidate in the 1964 election, Bill Miller. And my friend told me this time he went to this country club in Arizona, and it's, pure Republican country club. And you got talking to this one woman who said, man, we're going to have a massive victory over Lyndon Baines Johnson in November because everybody here supports Goldwater. Well, yeah, if you're just talking to your friends at the country club, that's the impression you're going to get. But then there's a thing called reality, which Patrick was very ably describing. Russia has laid its terms out, and it is said, look, if to the West, if you want to negotiate, these are our starting terms now. This is where we have to start from, and then we can move on to other issues. Russia's ultimate goal is to get some solid security guarantees from the West that NATO is no longer going to push to the east, and ultimately, to have any kind of credible, authentic agreement that Russia could rely on, it's going to take a treaty between the United States and Russia that's ratified by the U.S. Senate. Barring that, there's not a damn agreement that Russia could sign with the West that would guarantee its security. Nothing. Because Trump, no matter what he thinks, he's going to be undermined by the likes of Lindsey Graham, Chuck Schumer, and other members of the Congress on the House of Representatives side as well, who, frankly, they've been taking money from the Ukraine. They've received millions of dollars to provide support for Ukraine. So there's this animus hatred towards Russia is not just going to disappear overnight because Trump signs some sort of agreement. And you've got the only way you're tangibly going to get the United States on the hook, where it is firmly committed to a security arrangement with Russia, is through a treaty. That's not going to happen. Not going to happen. So, this is just this is the verbal equivalent of masturbation. That's all it is. That's why I call it chatterbation.
Chatterbation. Patrick, same comment, same reaction, same question to you.
If this is so complex, and the longer this goes on, the longer this process just draws out, it gets increasingly complex. That's the problem. And what's required here, if you want to get a negotiated settlement, okay, if this was my gig, it's not my gig, it's Trump's gig. He's omnipotent. He knows everything. If you forget about, it's so funny. I noticed this at the Doha Summit. Donald Trump Jr. was on the panel at the Doha Summit, popping off about my father. He says my father more often than Cynthia McCain. He goes, my father. What's
that's great.
What he says the great thing about my father is that he is so unpredictable. Nobody knows what he's going to do next. He is not like those other bureaucrats, those other politicians and former U.S. presidents. He's very unpredictable. That like this is some great asset, right? This is the kiss of death in international relations, because you cannot interface with other countries and world powers by being completely unpredictable. And the joke of this is Trump doesn't know what he's going to do next. He's the one that's clueless because he doesn't know where he's going. He has no direction at all, and neither do any of his team. Okay, these are rank incompetents. These are charlatans. These are people that, quite frankly, are only interested in how much wealth they can accumulate while they're still in power to get themselves set up for when the party's over. Okay, sorry to break it to people. So there's no way that this president, in how complicated the situation is, he cannot execute a multilateral deal. And for the reasons Larry said, domestically. So if it was my gig, I would handpick a team of people if I really wanted to make this work and make it happen and make history and win the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay. To me, I would just go and recruit the best diplomats, statespeople, people of the caliber of Larry, Ray McGovern, Douglas McGregor, John Mearsheimer, and so forth, and respectable people that understand diplomacy and international relations. I would then deploy them to Germany, to France. I mean, I would even use Richard Grenell for this job, among other people, and to Finland, to Denmark, okay, to the UK. Then I would deploy another team to the Democrats. I would deploy another team to the warmongering rhinos. Okay, you need to really work every corner of this global room. And the last place I would send anybody is to Kiev, because when you arrive in Kiev after you've done your work and done the groundwork for this, you then tell the Ukrainians, sign there. It's over. That's a fait accompli. And that's what it would take, very decisive, intelligent statecraft, the likes of which Donald Trump is not capable of doing, nor is anybody who is clinging on to him in this orbit of opportunists and political grifters. That's the problem. And look at how look at how he's executing the situation in Venezuela. Just have a good look at that. Okay, that's what that's the level you're dealing with, that believes that that it's military force, it's making up stories about what a country is doing or not doing, and using this to somehow justify something that is probably going to end up being worse than Iraq, in the way that it's people are going to look back at it. So based on this, I don't see in the next 3 years that there's going to be any negotiated settlement that's taken by the United States, unless there's some radical change in Trump's cabinet or Trump is removed. and somebody else comes in who could actually do it. Otherwise, the risk of war is very high because, and this is the paradox of the U.S. Presence in Europe. The U.S. can't stay in Europe, but it can't leave either, because to leave the Europeans to their own devices is really asking for trouble, and ultimately the U.S. will be drawn back in to put out a fire started by Britain or one of the European partners, and that would be by design. So Europe and NATO, and the U.S. in NATO and Europe only works with competent, sane leadership. And the last two U.S. administrations, I'm sorry, don't fit that bill. Although in a strange way, and Larry may or may not agree with me on this, but with Biden, they had solidarity between the Europeans and the Americans. Now, we don't like the result of that solidarity, but there was solidarity there. Now you don't have that, and the chaos factor increases as a result. So that's the difference. Because Trump, in classic fascist, and I'm not being flippant, classic fascist characteristic in politics is alienating your allies and not talking to your opposition because you don't feel you have to. And this is kind of how this U.S. administration is behaving. And there's a lot of problems that are going to go with that. And we're starting to see that now with repeated failures.
Mm. Yeah, what did Vladimir Putin say before the 2024 elections were decided? When he was asked who he would choose, Harris or Trump, he said, "Well, I choose the Harris side because it's predictable.
Yeah.
It's predictable, right?"
Yeah.
So, Larry, any reaction to this? I wanted to first, given there's a context here, and I said on a different program that Trump could actually look very much the part of a powerful actor if you were to kind of go with reality and play I'm going to be the one to settle this. Russia might even allow it if it was on their terms, but Vladimir Putin said to the Defense Council exactly what we've been saying in terms of the actual situation. So I'm just going to play this and get your reaction to anything Patrick said and what he said.
Was a major year in terms of delivering the objectives of the special military operation. The Russian army has been holding strategic initiatives along the entire front line. Our troops have been advancing confidently and steadily. This includes the elite units which were trained in the West. They're being defeated by the Russian troops. They're equipped with foreign equipment and weapons. This year, over 300 communities have been liberated already, including major cities, which the enemy turned into strongholds, where there are long-term fortifications and permanent fortification facilities, but they could not resist the courage and valor and combat prowess of our fighters.
So, Larry, not sounding like capitulation is on the table here, which begs the question, your reaction to this, as well as anything Patrick had to say.
Well, no disagreement at all with Patrick's assessment. I'd put it this way. Just because you put wings on a pig doesn't mean that the pig is an eagle, okay? And the only thing the West has done effectively throughout the course of this war or special military operation in Ukraine is on the propaganda front. They've mastered the art of lying and pretending that they're winning, and in the process persuading an enormous number of European leaders and average people, as well as in the United States, that by God, they're on the cusp of victory. Just one more little push, and Russia's going to collapse into a puddle. They just can't continue like this. They're losing too many men. They're running out of gas. Their economy's on the verge of collapse. I mean, good Lord, the lies go on and on and on without any kind of logic to it. And so I recommend sort of the Muhammad Ali rope-a-dope strategy. You know, you step back, let the other side punch themselves out until they get so tired they can't continue fighting. If the situation was as the Ukrainians pretend it is, and as many in the West pretend it is, why does Ukraine need any more support? They're winning. Why do they need money? They have got the Russians on teetering on the edge of the cliff. They should have no problem finishing them off. And at that point, oh no, we need more money. Yeah, they need more money because they're getting paid. The number of I guarantee you that Ursula von der Leyen, von der Leyen, but I like fond of lying. I think it's a much more poetic image. And Kaya Kallas, probably one of the dumbest women to ever inhabit a political office. And actually, let's not pin it on women. Just one of the dumbest people, regardless of her sex. I guarantee you, they've been getting money. They have gotten rich off of this war, and so what's the incentive to stop it? Keep the money flowing. So what we're seeing right now, though, is the culmination of Russia recruiting and building up its ground forces over the course of the last 3.5 years, 3 years, 10 months. And now we're in a position that Russia has 1.5 million troops. About 700 to 800,000 of them are now committed on the ground in Ukraine. And Ukraine can't match it. The best estimates for Ukrainian forces are about 300,000. So this has the potential to end very rapidly now, despite people talking about a stalemate and it's going to continue into 2027 or 2028. I frankly don't see how it goes beyond next June, if it even lasts that long, because the losses, the combat losses are steady and significant for the Ukrainians. The Russian casualties have fallen dramatically. The biggest period of casualties was from summer of 22 until the summer of 2023. But since then, it's been a diminishing number, whereas the Ukrainian losses are probably 8 to 9 times that of the Russian losses. And big difference in population size. Ukraine right now has a population of 19 million. Russia is about 140 million. It's a simple math problem from here on out.
Patrick, I thought maybe we could now begin on the next war that is, what some are believing is actually beginning and really jumping off. Donald Trump, he took to Truth Social, predictably maybe, to comment on what he is calling a full-scale blockade now of Venezuela. He said, and here it is, Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. It will only get bigger, and the shock to them all will be like nothing they've seen before, until such time they return to the United States of America, and everyone should listen to this very well, all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these stolen oil fields to finance themselves, drugs, terrorism, human trafficking, murdering, kidnapping, on and on and on. He's designated the regime a foreign terrorist organization and has ordered a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers. So, Patrick, help us understand, is this the start of the real start to the war in Venezuela? Obviously, there's been a major buildup, but perhaps you can talk about this, your assessment of this situation and your reaction to Donald Trump's declaration.
I, for the life of me, can't work out what Venezuela has stolen from the United States. If I'm not mistaken, it's Donald Trump's first term where they began to pilfer and steal and seize the Venezuelan state oil company, formerly known as Citgo, and distribute the proceeds to Juan Guaido, Maria Corina Machado, and the so-called opposition, or the U.S. appointed president, or whatever he was, and maybe to Trump's inner circle. I don't know who is going to get the oil from these seized tankers. And he's saying, well, they're sanctioned, therefore we can take them. So this is just a flagrant violation of all international norms. This is belligerency. This is piracy on the high seas. The blockade based on what? Venezuela is not involved in any terrorism. Okay, they can't prove that they're involved in any significant way in the drugs trade. Least of all, any drugs coming into America, most of which are coming in by land, by the way, over the Mexican border, and Ecuador, and countries like that being major trafficking hubs, Central America, Guatemala, and so forth. So I don't know what he's talking about. So this is just kind of crazy. And this is a prelude to, they're already at war. The U.S. are already at war with Venezuela. But a blockade like this, and then saying that we're going to commit U.S. military assets to stop any trade in and out of Venezuela, that's a full embargo. This is a prelude to war. You have to remember why Japan attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. It was for this very reason. Japan was preempting a situation where they were being completely strangled by the Allied powers, as it were, and they felt they had no choice but to strike out preemptively. And also is just a really an existential survival issue for Japan believed at the time. So that's how the U.S. got into the war. So I think the U.S. Trump is he also has the his record is that a lot of the times he has also folded. Okay. Now he wants a reaction. Is it going to be a false flag attack? Is it going to be a Gulf of Tonkin attack? Certainly that is possible with this administration. But is Venezuela going to strike a U.S. naval asset preemptively in order to accelerate? I don't think so. It would have to come from America, because Venezuela knows that it's a weaker power, and that if it's seen to be in the wrong in terms of hitting the U.S., even though they're surrounded, you throw one stone at a U.S. soldier, and all of a sudden, Fox News goes into hyperdrive, America at war, and then off we go, kind of thing. So I don't know how this is supposed to work. Ground assaults in Venezuela? I don't think so. I really don't. Hitting television stations with bombing runs? Yes. Hitting airstrips? Yes. Hitting military facilities in Venezuela? Yes. The U.S. Trump could do this. But this is going to inflame the world against the United States and Latin America. This is sending a message to every Latin American government that the U.S. could just make up any reason to overthrow them and steal their resources, full stop. So, I mean, in many ways, this is worse than Iraq, in my opinion. Not just because it's in the Western Hemisphere, but because at least the Bush administration had the decency to go through the effort of faking the intelligence for us, the public. And we can look back and be entertained by yellow cake uranium in Niger, and Valerie Plame and Colin Powell at the UN Security Council. I mean, at least they cared. Bush cared about us enough to give us that ultimate BS of fake intelligence. But Trump doesn't need that. He just waves his hands and says narco-terrorist, and away we go. So, I mean, I don't know what to say, really. It's totally insane.
Yeah, Larry, to you.
Well, let's start with, I was going back checking what's called the INCSR, the International Narcotics Control Strategy Report, which is issued every year by State Department. And, Venezuela has always been identified, at least over the last 15 years, as a drug transit point. It's not a producer of the narcotics. It's not a supplier of fentanyl. It is, you've got a lot of people in Venezuela that have seen an economic opportunity and taken it. But the claim is, Patrick noted, calling them narco terrorists is nonsensical. It's a made up term. I believe, I can't prove this. I can't point to a document, but all I can do is look back at what has unfolded since Donald Trump's first term. And I came to this conclusion after doing some research, trying to figure out where did this whole Tren de Aragua come from? I'd never heard of them before. And I've spent some time in Venezuela doing, product counterfeiting investigations and some other things. Never heard of these guys. Well, they first pop in 2018, and they pop in a way that there's newspaper articles about them. The first one I think was in Peru. Well, that right away set off a red flag for me, because one of the ways the CIA operates is planting stories to create a narrative. And in light of that, that was also the year I think the big push to put Juan Guaido into office came. I believe in 2018, there was a presidential finding that authorized a CIA covert program to get rid of Maduro and to take control of Venezuela. I don't think that finding has ever gone away. They may not have done a lot with it while Biden was around, but now that Trump's back, it's back and it's active. The problem we have is, as Trump claims, we got all this mighty military force off the coast of Venezuela. So, okay, what are we going to do with it? That's why I maintain Venezuela is Spanish for Vietnam, but with this difference. Venezuela is 3 times the landmass of Vietnam. It has the same sort of jungle and difficult terrain, actually more so than Vietnam. And the United States is in a very exposed position now because they've made the threat that we're the toughest, we're the biggest, we're the baddest. And, Venezuela is not caving. And so the temptation is, as Patrick noted, we bomb certain locations. Well, that doesn't accomplish anything other than killing some Venezuelans on the ground. You look at the amount of missiles and rockets and drones that Russia has fired into Ukraine over the course of the last 3 years. And that doesn't cause Ukraine to collapse. Similarly, it's not going to cause Venezuela to collapse. Then you get to the prospect, okay, you're going to put in U.S. ground forces. In Vietnam, at the height of the war in April of 1969, the United States had 543,000 troops in Vietnam. Today, the U.S. Army is only 470,000. And yet we've got 18,000 people, 18,000 Marines, and some Army personnel poised to go into Venezuela. It's a suicide mission. I've driven that road or been a passenger in a taxi going from the airport, the international airport, which is down on the coast, and then driving up this mountain road into Caracas. Ambush points everywhere. And the Venezuelan people have a lot of weapons, and they'll find that they've got a lot of support from anti-U.S. groups such as the FARC, which are still active in Colombia, which is next door. So there has to be a strategy behind this, and that's the point I think Patrick was making. There is no strategy here. It's Donald Trump throwing stuff against the wall, hoping that it sticks. And I witnessed firsthand when I was at the CIA in 1988. The decision had been made in late '87, I believe, to get rid of Manuel Noriega. And so for the ensuing 1988, from January up and through December, when we finally invaded Panama, the CIA was engaged in a campaign to try to provoke Noriega into attacking us. And he kept refusing to take the bait. We're doing the same thing now with Maduro. And so far, Maduro has avoided taking the bait. And notice that this announcement about, they're only going to go after the ghost oil tankers. Well, Guess which country has oil tankers and a relationship with Venezuela? That would be China. And none of theirs are sanctioned tankers. So I wouldn't be surprised to see within the next week or two a Chinese tanker or a Russian flagged tanker sailing into Venezuela to pick up some oil. If nothing else, just to tell the United States to fuck off.
Well, actually, I wanted Patrick. Definitely want your commentary, but I'll pull up actually. DD Geopolitics published this. Russian shadow tanker Hyperion just entered the Caribbean waters, departing from the Umba offshore terminal in Murmansk towards Jose Terminal, Venezuela. The vessel is under U.S. sanctions, and there's the photo of where it's going. So, yeah, I mean, that's what I don't know, Patrick. The definition of what it means to do a blockade of sanctioned tankers, that's quite the legalese of what ultimately is all illegal. So, but your reactions and, especially toward the militarization, which I can pull up as you're talking, because there is a huge buildup off the coast. There is something coming. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the net result of this, you have to fast forward, past the lack of plan and strategy, which Trump clearly has none. The net result of this is, and this is very similar to U.S. behavior in vis-a-vis Ukraine, also in the Middle East too. But this, how the U.S. attacks its adversaries, how it attacks or threatens its allies with secondary sanctions. All of this has accelerated the development of BRICS. Okay, Donald Trump has done more for BRICS. The BRICS, when BRICS has its headquarters, they should have a nice plaque with Trump on it, because he's done more to accelerate the development of BRICS than anybody in BRICS. And ditto goes the same here. So if the U.S. doesn't like left-wing governments that are anti-imperialist, they are providing so much political ammunition to left-wing governments right through Latin America, and governments that are skeptical of U.S. manipulation, of U.S. intimidation, and also BRICS-aligned or prospective BRICS-aligned governments in Latin America. And this also dovetails with the U.S.'s national security strategy document, which is basically this sort of neo-Monroe Doctrine Western Hemisphere flex, where they come out saying, oh, how important the sovereign nation state model is, but sovereignty only extends as far as anything that gets in the way of our interests, and you don't have sovereignty when it comes to economic relations with China or Russia or Iran in our hemisphere. Thank you very much. So all this is going to do, it's sending a signal out to Brazil. It's sending a signal out to Chile. It's sending a signal out to Colombia, to Central America, to Mexico, that this is what the United States is going to do. They're going to rape, pillage, and plunder your country. And if you don't like it, they're going to send in the big guns, and it's gunboat diplomacy. And then that's how it's going to be. So are they going to cooperate, or are they going to band together? Normally in international relations, countries tend to band together if there's an implicit threat of force at some point in the future. And they also will not comply with sanctions if there's an implicit threat of force. Now, I know this because I studied sanctions game theory for my postgraduate degree. So my question is, has anybody in the Trump administration studied any of this? Looked at all these case studies for the last 50 years? I mean, it's kind of common sense. And if you look at the behavior, has Iran bent to the will of the U.S. after being under sanctions for 20, 30 years? No. Has Russia? No. Did Syria? No. They eventually capitulated, but only by attrition after 15 years of an economic vice grip between the EU and the United States. They can't do that to Venezuela. I'm sorry. Venezuela is too well integrated into Latin America. And now the unthinkable happened. The U.S. had Brazil against Venezuela. They had Colombia against Venezuela just 4 years ago. And now you're looking at a situation where there's going to be solidarity between Brazil, Venezuela, and Colombia. And what's Trump going to do about that? So he has created They'll even, I mean, Trump is even making communism look appealing to the far left in Latin America. And so it's against what the U.S.'s political project has been for the last 30 years. Trump has just basically upended all of it. Why? And I'll tell you why. And this last thing I'll say, and I don't want to make this all about Israel, but if the U.S. and Israel attack Iran, which they plan to do at some point in the near future, and Iran's reaction is to close the Straits of Hormuz, the United States and Israel, or the U.S. with interests of Israel, need to secure another oil supply to hedge against this in the Western Hemisphere, and that's Venezuela. That's why Israel's so involved in Venezuelan politics, backing Machado and so forth. So there's a geopolitical element to this that I think extends beyond the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, I mean, well, Israel has the Isaac Accords, right? They have a whole plan, and it's not like there isn't a history.
That's exactly
of
what it's
Zionists
about,
and-
Danny.
Yeah,
Exactly. It is the Isaac Accords, basically.
yeah. Well, Larry, any reaction to this? Also, you know, Latin America, there's been recent, whether it's Argentina, Ecuador, whether it's Chile of late, the stolen election in Honduras. It isn't as if the so-called hemisphere, the Latin America, hasn't already been retrenching with U.S. interference, obviously involved in all of it, toward U.S. interests. But doesn't the war in Venezuela threaten all that, as Patrick says? Because it would be hugely destabilizing. Your thoughts?
Well, the United States has been had quite a schizophrenic policy with respect to Central South America. So, 40 years ago, when I was the Honduran analyst, Honduras was the war with the Contras in Nicaragua, meaning that the United States was obsessed under Ronald Reagan with what was going on in Nicaragua, Salvador, Honduras, and Costa Rica, to a lesser extent, Guatemala. And then back then, the average analyst at CIA, they may get to write once a month, maybe twice a month for the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief. I was writing 2 to 3 times a week. So I was getting a high profile. And then sort of that war ends, and good Lord, we couldn't find Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua on a map. And the same for, South America, except for Colombia. Colombia figured in this big the counter narcotics strategy. It was crafted in the late 80s. Actually, one of my former, now retired business partner, Robert Nieves, he was chief of international operations at DEA, and he came up with the concept of what was called the Kingpin program. And the Kingpin program was operated on the belief that if we just capture, arrest, or if necessary, kill the leading members of the cartels, that will curtail the drug trade. And I think Bobby would admit today, he said, well, okay, it sounded like a good idea at the time, but it turned out to be a very bad idea. Because once you start taking down the members of those cartels, they just simply split off. It's like hitting a ball of mercury with a hammer, and it separates, doesn't disappear. So Colombia became sort of the center of U.S. counter-narcotics efforts in this hemisphere. Well, Mexico and Colombia. In Mexico, with the murder of DEA agent Kiki Camarena in, what was that, like 1987? And then with the rise of Pablo Escobar, and you had the Cali cartel, it became a big focus. My former boss at State Department, Morris Busby, aka Buzz. Buzz was ambassador in Colombia from 1993 through 1995, 96, and he led the hunt for Pablo Escobar at the time. Netflix has made a series called Narcos that features Ambassador Crosby, which was actually modeled after Ambassador Busby. Even the actor has made it looks like Buzz a little bit. But my point in all this is we've had this focus of trying to cooperate and use political leverage to get control of the drug trade. Now they're using the so-called narco-terrorism as a pretext, as a justification to do what Patrick was talking about, get control of the oil. That's what it's ultimately about, because I think they fully anticipate that there will be a shutdown in the Persian Gulf. The Iranians will close the Straits of Hormuz, and then you need an alternative source of oil. Apart from that, just Israel would like to have another source of oil instead of right now having to rely upon Turkey, because I think they're beginning to have doubts that Turkey and Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan can be counted upon as reliable allies in the future.
Yeah, Patrick, we're definitely going to get to Israel in the last segment, but your final comments on this one, especially in regard to this Israel connection, because I think this isn't talked about enough, and it is hugely influential on U.S. foreign policy, despite the fact that the U.S. itself, of course, has big imperial interests when it comes to Venezuela, but Israel is right there, making a huge whole campaign out of Latin America and its political direction.
What people have to realize is that one of the biggest recipients of U.S. military aid behind Israel and Egypt, normally in third or fourth place, is Colombia, and that has been the case for many years. Okay, now along tangential to that, Israel has a big military presence in Colombia during this period as well. And the Colombian death squads, the paramilitaries fighting the FARC, okay, trained, armed, equipped by who? IDF.
Mm-hmm.
And so they had very tight relationship. And guess what? Just guess what? That relationship came to a screeching halt. And those ties have been almost completely severed in the last 2 years because of October 7th. So you see that this Colombian government under Gustavo Petro is not basically allowing Israel to run amok in their jungles and in their country, and basically working with their military, along with the U.S. has a strong military presence, and has had in Colombia as well. So this is partly also because the U.S. had engineered making Colombia an adversary of Venezuela, where it wasn't necessarily before. And I think that was an artificial situation. And now you can see that's changed. And part of that is because of Israel. The other thing is the drug trafficking. Now, I'm not going to make any major accusations, but one of the highest per capita recreational drug user countries in the world is Israel. Okay, just saying. Okay, so there's a huge flow into the Middle East and Europe, and this could be with Israeli military, it could be with U.S. military, could be with the best way to traffic drugs is via military. It always has been traditionally. So, and then because when looking at this Trump administration is so aligned with criminal activity that it's mind-boggling, and we're not talking petty, on a very high level, and I'll tell you why. Why would the Trump administration, if it's supposedly fighting a war on drugs against Venezuela, why did Donald Trump pardon Juan Hernandez, former Honduran president, the biggest single drug trafficking, one of the biggest indictments sent down in a federal trial in the U.S. history, 400 tons of cocaine, and so on one hand, he's saying he's fighting a war on drugs. He's willing to commit the U.S. military, U.S. blood and treasure, reputation on this, to die on that hill. And he goes and pardons one of the biggest drug traffickers sent down in a federal trial. That doesn't make any sense. Where's the word coming from on that? Someone told him to pardon this guy. Where do you think that's come from? It has to have come from the cartels via maybe Marco Rubio or somebody. And I'm saying this doesn't make any sense. So there has to be an explanation here that their criminal organizations are leaning on the U.S. government in exactly the same way that Joe Biden was being leaned on by criminal elements in Ukraine. Okay, So the U.S. has a huge problem. I think our country, our government, the last two administrations particularly, have very compromised because of what they've become entangled in internationally. If you look at Daniel Noboa, youngest president ever elected in Ecuador, very tight with Marco Rubio. But isn't it Daniel Noboa's family's company, the Noboa Trading Company, that were caught trafficking cocaine with banana shipments? And here we are, Nicolas Maduro, the biggest drug trafficker, supposedly, according to the Trump administration. And our Secretary of State is chummy with somebody whose family company, has been implicated in major drug trafficking. And look at the league table of drug trafficking. Ecuador is very high. Venezuela is not even in Division 1 on that list. And Larry probably knows that score better than me, but none of this adds up or makes any sense based on the evidence of what we know. But instead we're getting, I feel like a lot's going on here. And I'm not going to say the Democrats are innocent either, because if you look at Democrat policy of open borders during the Biden administration and during Obama, and who knows what sort of corruption lays beneath the surface in the U.S. political system vis-a-vis drug cartels. That you have to have some political grease to make this happen. And we know the CIA, the DEA, elements of which have been implicated in drug trafficking previously. That's no surprise. That's historically documented, even in Venezuela prior to Chavez. But we have to look at the reality here that this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, drugs and human trafficking and so forth, and they do have their tentacles into the U.S. political system on some level, at least in terms of influence. Who knows, super PACs? Because Israel certainly does, and I regard that as an international criminal organization, the Israeli lobby. So why not here? I'm just asking and posing this question because Donald Trump pardoning Hernandez, to me, is a massive red flag. And it really, and also taking down, Venezuela was a mule country, more so before Chavez, during the early 90s, using the Venezuelan National Guard, the CIA, to traffic cocaine, which ultimately ended up in America. And I think this Cartel del Sol or whatever was hatched during that time. Okay. And Maduro insists that Venezuela is not involved in narco trafficking, at least not at any state level. And if you think about the primacy of the military in terms of the Bolivarian project and having to keep that squeaky clean in order to have credibility with the working class in Venezuela, it makes sense that Maduro is telling the truth on that U.S. is lying on that front. But maybe they want to bring it back to its former mule status as a corrupt country like it was before. I'm just putting that out there.
I think it's great points. When Juan Orlando Hernandez was released, it was right around the same time that Honduras was having an election, which is being claimed by, I believe it's the Labor Party of Xiomara Castro, the former president, saying that it was rigged. And suddenly Juan Orlando Hernandez is out of prison at the same exact time that this contested election is happening. There's obviously some grease being squeaked. Some grease being squeaked.
One point, Danny. Do you know who else was involved in that Honduran election? It was Trump's former campaign manager, Brad Parscales, the guy who was on suicide watch during the 2020 election and had to leave the Trump campaign. He's involved in the electioneering, his firm, of this Honduran election. Whoa, I'm sorry, guys. We got some red flags here and a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Hey, Danny, let me just bring another dimension to this with respect to the whole Jewish Zionist influence and the Muslim presence throughout Central and South America. One thing that a lot of people don't, I did a lot of work in the Cologne Free Trade Zone in terms of investigating product counterfeiting. So the counterfeiting, the actual production of it largely comes out of China, other Asian countries. But you've got a crew of Pakistani or Indian Muslims, known as the Sindhis, who play a leading role in having, taking orders for a whole host of different counterfeit products. And what exists when you go into the clone-free trade zone is you've got a large number of Muslim merchants coming out of Lebanon. Most, I think it's predominantly Shia with a few Sunnis. But when you go down the names, the family names, there's the Waked family, Abdul Muhammad Waked, who owns one of the major duty-free businesses throughout Central and South America. The Hachems, the Sakers, Omais, and even the Bin Ladens had some companies in Panama. Well, then you go outside of Panama, go to Isla Margarita off the coast of Venezuela. You find those names I just gave you. You find them there. There is, in fact, at Isla Margarita, you got the Darwich family, the Omais again, the Nasruddin, the Hassan, and the Osman. Now, why I'm raising this is you go from Venezuela to Maicao, Colombia. Again, you see those same names crop up. Go down south to Ciudad del Este, which is in the tri-border area of Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina. The same family networks. And then to Chile, Iquique. So what you have is of this extended family. It's almost tribal with these different families, but they interact and their primary goal is making money, not terrorism. It's making money. And the interesting part of this is you've got not as large a presence, but still you've got the Jewish factions. And I actually did an investigation into one of those businesses, and found out that the owner of the business, it was on the eve of Eid, and he was making up gift baskets. And I asked him what he was doing. And he goes, "Oh, I'm making up baskets for my Muslim neighbors." So when it comes to making money, the religious differences sometimes take a back seat. I also knew personally a guy named Marco Shrem, Jewish. He was involved in smuggling weapons with the IDF's assistance out of Guatemala, passing through Panama that were headed to the AUC, the Alta Defensa of Colombia. So, what Patrick was pointing out about these, the Israeli relationship, nefarious relationship, is quite apparent. And it's not just the Jewish influence, because these different Muslim names I was reading off, they also are politically important. And so there is a potential to see this clash of Zionism versus Islam spread into Central and South America. And we just saw Trump recently, they're talking about the role of Iran, Hamas and Hezbollah in Central and South America. Well, it's just a red herring. These people are, I've had extensive experience looking at them. They're involved with making money. Now, they may do it with counterfeit products, but they're still more about commerce than about an ideological war against Jews.
Yeah, I mean, all great points. And Patrick, I want to bring it back to you. I just want to play just to underscore, because you sent me an article. I'm going to put it up after this. I think they go together. Donald Trump was just speaking at I believe it was a Hanukkah event in Washington. And he said many things which I think are indicative of just how close U.S. and Israeli. We want to look at foreign policy or empire building. A lot have been claiming Israel is also, in the business of building an empire itself, however possible that is or not. But here is Donald Trump at this event.
Adelson, you want to come up here? Come up here, Miriam. Miriam gave my campaign indirectly and directly $250 million. She was number one. When somebody can give you $250 million, I think that we should give her the opportunity to say hello. And Miriam, make it quick, because $250 million is not what it used to be.
Jesus.
So there's and then Mark Levin. I just want to pull this one up. It's very short.
Hey, I'm going to call the Human Rights Commission on you if you play that shit. Okay.
Well, I'll put
too
my
late.
earplugs in for Mark Levine.
God
6 years
almighty.
ago, I was up here, and I said, "This is our first Jewish president." It's true. Now he's the first Jewish president to serve two not consecutive presidencies.
So Patrick, to you on this, to continue on this Israel connection, we also have, your article you sent to me now about the Honduras situation, which I can pull up as you're talking.
Well, the point to make is, and Larry laid out some pretty compelling evidence there about the turf warfare, but also about some of the things that lie in the background here of our mainstream political conversation behind. There's all sorts of these real things happening, but my concern is that the Trump administration, and the irony of this is just too much. Okay, Donald Trump himself is a victim of a fake plot that was hatched that accused him of being placed in power by foreign interference. Okay. Now you'd think that if you survived all that, the last thing you'd want to do as president is to be involved in foreign interference yourself by meddling in other countries' elections. And Donald Trump has not done it subtly. Okay. With regards to Argentina, he intervenes in he meddles in the Argentinian political process by threatening to withhold a financial bailout of Milei during this last midterm cycle, that if Milei's party doesn't win, he's going to withhold $20 billion in assistance. Okay, and of course, that did help Milei, I'm sure. And then, of course, that was withdrawn by I think the Federal Reserve or the Treasury after that. But that's just direct coercion by the U.S. using economic carrot and stick in there. And the other thing is in Honduras, blatantly meddling in the Honduran election, blatantly, not even hiding it. And so that to me is, and this is so damning, that Donald Trump would endorse Nasri Asfura, who it looks like his former campaign manager, Brad Parscale, is working on behalf of. At the same time, as you said, Danny, and as we noted, the pardoning of Juan Orlando Hernandez at the same time. And also the rigging of polls. That these are the accusations regarding Honduras. Okay, and so the United States is pouring a lot of resources into getting a political outcome in Honduras in a Latin American election, as they have been pouring a lot of resources into Argentina. I mean, unprecedented sums. Okay, what is going on here? So this is total meddling, total interference in supposedly in the U.S. national security strategy. Oh, we respect the sovereignty of nations. It's too much to bear. The hypocrisy is ridiculous at this point, that you really can't take anything seriously in terms of doctrines or policies that's coming out of this administration. And as far as the Mary Madelson clip, that's so cringeworthy. The Mark Levine clip is even worse. But what that shows is the president is not ashamed of basically being for sale to the highest bidder. And that's really what it comes down to. And is this the image America wants to portray? I mean, talk about corruption. If this was happening, if that happened in Russia, and that was Putin and some oligarch, they'd be making a meal out of it forever. Okay. But because it's happening in America with an American-Israeli oligarch, perfectly fine. In fact, it's celebrated by half the United States. But this is the very thing the U.S. decries internationally when they point the finger and demand regime change in all of these countries. It's unbelievable. They can never point to that type of situation in Venezuela. So let's talk about corruption.
Well,
yeah,
actually, that's why I would argue one of the reasons why there's such hatred in the West for Putin. Putin took on the Zionist oligarchs, the Jewish oligarchs in Russia. and told him basically, you can invest here in this country, and if you don't, I'm going to put you in prison. Well, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, he tested Putin and found out, he went the FAFO route and found out. So that's the biggest difference. We allow our government to be bought by these Zionists, both Jewish and Christian, and Trump revels in it. And it's actually it is what is alienating a significant portion of Trump's base. People are sick and tired of this Zionist nonsense that they've got somehow. You've got this collection of people who claim that according to this holy book, they're entitled to this land, and yet probably 60% of the people who embrace that notion of Zionism do not believe in God. So it's like your entire raison d'etre is gone. Either you believe it and embrace it. I've got more respect for people on that front, but for these others who just they like the notion without accepting the so-called spiritual foundations of it.
Yeah, well, final comments for both of you on, when it comes to how Trump has behaved in particular, it's almost like the other side of the coin of Russiagate. I mean, Russiagate, the Democrats, they went so hard with the CIA and everyone to say Russia was stealing. It would say, oh, Russia's weak and it's this gas station, can't do anything, but it's stealing elections in the United States. Really delegitimized, actually, the electoral process, especially for the Democratic Party, made them look pretty weak. And they were saying their weak adversary was controlling the strings. And then now you have Donald Trump very openly saying that Israel is a huge influence, so influential that they're giving $250,000 just from one donor to buy that influence. So yeah, Patrick, final comments on anything on this whole situation, because it really does speak, I think, to the state of the empire, the state of the world order as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, in Britain, a member of the Reform Party was just sentenced to prison for supposedly accepting bribes from pro-Russian sources, not even Russian sources, but like Medvedchuk-aligned Ukrainian sources, to say good things about Russia. And they took it out of the category of lobbying and put it into the category of criminal activity. This is, I guess, an MP or an MEP, sorry, I think a European member of parliament from the Reform Party, Nigel Farage's party, if I'm not mistaken. But that verdict was just rendered recently. And they're crying about foreign interference. Oh my God. And the net result of this is that person made pro-Russian statements, as if that makes any difference with UK or European policy vis-a-vis Russia. It's not moving sanctions, or it's not causing anyone to back off the military NATO positions against Russia. No, but look at the Israeli influence in US politics and British politics and European politics. It has specific outcomes, and those outcomes fall under the category of war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide. Israel's president is indicted by the International Criminal Court for genocide, as is their defense minister. Their whole country is being indicted by the International Courts of Justice for genocide. So that's the kind of foreign influence that Israel's buying to basically pay countries to look the other way for their war crimes. And at the same time, these countries are arming them without any conditions or reservations at all to carry out those very same war crimes. So it's buying complicity, it's buying silence, and ultimately it makes all those countries that are involved in this real influence, foreign influence operation, of being co-belligerents to the worst and most heinous international war crimes that we have witnessed in the modern era, broadcast live on TV. And nobody in the West has a problem with that, at least the political leadership. I think the people have a problem with it. And I think that's reflected in the flagging poll numbers of Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz, Keir Starmer, and, as Larry mentioned previously, the hemorrhaging of support of the MAGA movement for Donald Trump. Look at Trump's polling among independents, where he began the year in his term with something like 43% of independents, and now he's polling under 4% of independents in 11 months. That's a 10x drop, and that's your swing vote. That they put Trump into power. No, there's no doubt about that. So they're gone. They fled. They're out. And I'll bet you those numbers are going to be even. You can't go any further underwater right now for Trump and MAGA than he currently is. He has alienated his base, and I don't know. It almost makes me think like the MAGA project was a fraud from the beginning, because I'm straining to see the sincerity in this president. I'm searching for a trace of morality or ethics or some kind of universal values somewhere in what he's doing, and I cannot see it for the life of me. And that's very disturbing, considering how he campaigned and the amount of support he got as an anti-war president. That I'm different from the other warmongers. I'm different from Hillary Clinton. No, definitely not. And we're only 1 year into this term, and that's something.
Yeah, Larry, your final thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that Patrick said. This Trump has done tremendous damage to himself. He's like, I think you're old enough to remember, Danny, you probably aren't, but Patrick may be. When Coca-Cola came out with New Coke, and they're telling everybody what a great drink it was and how wonderful it was, public hated it. You know, then basically it tastes like horse piss. And no matter how much Coca-Cola invested in marketing and advertising dollars to convince people, no, it's really a great drink, they finally had to back off and move away from it. Trump is now still in that category of trying to sell himself things. Oh man, this has been such a successful year. We couldn't be doing better. That as unemployment is going up, as inflation remains high, as the line of countries that were supposed to be, trailing around the block to kiss Donald Trump's ass haven't appeared. As his promise to be the peace president at the very day that he announces an embargo and blockade to steal land and oil from Venezuela. It's just, it's a schizophrenic president. And I think, it may sound minor, but Trump's awful response to the murder of Rob Reiner and his wife by by their son. Good God. I mean, Trump displayed a level of mental illness and narcissism in his response that I think removed any doubt that he's got full command of his senses. So this is only going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel, Patrick, you use this word a bunch of times, it doesn't feel serious. It does feel like actually going through the motions, but what is striking to me about a lot of Trump's record up until this point, just in less than a year, we're coming up to the year, I guess, in a month, but the rapid cycling through the disasters. So, we're talking about Yemen, Iran, Gaza, now, the Russia, of course, Russia is a different beast, different subject. You can't cycle through that. But of course, the tariffs, it's just a rapid cycling in it. Yeah, we're only a year in. And that has led to, I think, a continued delegitimization of the U.S. political process as a whole, because it's not like there's an alternative in Washington that's doing anything to convince anyone that there's a brighter future. So what we're seeing is, I think we're seeing the destruction of whatever, MAGA, the political process, the political development that brought Trump in, and a huge empty void. It's a really huge empty void that exists otherwise. So I don't know if you want to comment on this, Patrick, or...
Well, the last thing I'll say is this trope that people attribute to Trump. No new wars during his first term. That's actually not true. Trump invaded and occupied Syria, northeastern Syria in 2017, and we never left. We stayed there through the Biden administration. They're not going anywhere now. He prosecuted the war against Yemen, along using, obviously, the Saudis and the Emiratis to do the heavy lifting on that. And also he did nothing to try to implement the Minsk Accords. between 2016 and 2020? Nothing. Instead, he provided lethal aid to Ukraine and helped to arm the Ukrainian military up to NATO standard to prepare for the war that everybody, let's face it, knew was coming. Okay. So this no new wars business is a total trope, and he's made up for it in his second term. He has attacked Iran unprovoked. He's attacked Yemen. He has he's threatening to attack Venezuela. He has bombed Somalia. Let me see, what have we left out here? He has obviously, without qualification, supported and armed Israel in one of the most horrific genocides of the modern era. And now, and by the way, attacks against Russia by Ukraine, the United States and the Trump administration were very much involved in those as well. So you can count attacks on Russia. So Trump has started 3 or 4 new wars in the last 11 months. Okay, he's also attacked a few other countries. And these are very, very risky geopolitical flashpoints that could easily cascade into something much worse. Okay, so if we should just declare MAGA RIP at this point. You know, it's so far beyond. He's more of a neocon. I'll say much more neocon. It's become more neocon than the Bush administration. Because at least the Bushes, the Cheneys, where they couched it in this ideological framework and had Charles Krautheimer doing black tie dinner speeches about neoconservatism, and then they had this kind of thing, this cultural political thing they couched it, and it almost made it look like it was legitimate. Trump doesn't have any of that. It's just raw Hobbesian state of nature neoconservatism. That's really smash and grab, quite frankly. It's international gangsterism. And so I will say, last thing, and I know this is going to probably piss off some MAGAs, but this administration will go down in history as the most corrupt in the history of the United States to date. And I say that with great regret. You know, being somebody that hoped that this would be different. And that's how history is going to end up looking back at this.
Mm.
So, but that's not. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar. He has no lawful authority to do so. It would require an act of Congress for him to do so, but that's not going to stop Donald Trump declaring war on Venezuela and, by extension, much of Latin America, certainly the masses of Latin America, if not their increasingly fascistic governments. It is a black eye for me, for sure. I said as recently as last evening to my good friend Jackson Hinkle that I thought that Trump was bluffing, was blinding us to something else that was going to happen. But I, as George Bush would put it, underestimated Donald Trump's madness, about which more later. According to Tucker Carlson, who definitely should know, he was briefed yesterday that in the presidential address to be given later this evening in the United States, Donald Trump is going to declare a state of war with Venezuela. May God help the people of Venezuela, and may God help the soldiers, sailors, and airmen that Donald Trump orders in to do his bidding, because mass casualty event it definitely will be. And it will not be a short war, and it will not be decided by who's in the presidential palace in Caracas. As Mr. Churchill once put it, that would not be the beginning of the end. That would merely be the end of the beginning. It will be guerrilla war It will be guerra prolongera. It will be a prolonged war fought in the cities, in the towns, in the villages, in the hamlets, in the mountains, in the jungles, and on the beaches. The Venezuelan people will never surrender to the overbearing arrogance of this lunatic, Donald J. Trump. Why do I say lunatic? Because I read his address, which could only be described as a presidential address, on Truth Social last night, in which, inter alia, he says that he has now blockaded Venezuela completely, and that the country is completely surrounded, and that the blockade will soon be joined by more ships, and it will not end until, and I'm quoting this one directly, until Venezuela returns all the oil and all the land that they have stolen from the United States of America. If that's not Amendment 25 territory, I don't know what is. Donald Rumsfeld famously opined that it wasn't America's fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries. That was actually a more logical framing, formulation than what Trump wrote last night. Trump is claiming Venezuela's oil as his own, and he's claiming Venezuelan land as his own. Well, in a way, he did everybody a favor by that formulation, because if there is one thing guaranteed to maximize the resistance and opposition to the war that is now imminent, it is the claim that the United States owns the land of Latin America. Never mind the oil, but the land under which the oil is to be found. Nothing could turn this more obviously into a patriotic war. It's now guaranteed to send a beacon throughout Latin America. And they're quite good at guerra prolongera, you know. They're quite good guerrilla fighters, the Latin American peoples. After all, thanks to American support for military and fascist dictatorship throughout Latin America, all of my lifetime, they've had to fight their way to anything resembling a democracy. They had to fight their way to one in Colombia. They had to fight their way to one, and many times in Venezuela. They had to fight their way to one in Argentina, in Honduras, in Guatemala, in El Salvador, in Nicaragua, in Brazil. The people had to fight this guerra prolongera, and they ultimately triumphed. And they will triumph also in Venezuela. As I said, it will merely be the beginning of the end if Maria Machado, the Nobel laureate, does walk into the presidential palace. If she does, the actual president, the real president, elected president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, whom I knew when he was a bus driver, knew when he was the foreign minister, and now know as the legitimate president of Venezuela. He will probably either be in the mountains or in the jungles, or in the mountains with jungles, in Garland Nixon's peerless phrase. So this battle will continue for many years, and it will not be confined to the borders of Venezuela. There are going to be a lot of American casualties. There are going to be a lot of American losses. The international system will receive a gigantic shock to the system by the action that Donald Trump is going to declare this evening. This is blatant illegality, following on from the blatant piracy with the oil tanker earlier in the week, following on from the blatant murder of unknown rubber dinghies in the Eastern Caribbean and in the environs, not just of Venezuela, but of Colombia. This is blatant, brazen illegality. Not since Hitler declared that Poland had invaded Germany? Has there been a more paper-thin, transparent, translucent war of aggression, war of choice, just like so many wars of aggression and wars of choice that the United States has fought in my lifetime, in the Dominican Republic, in the whole of the Latin American continent. The United States has chosen conflict with its near neighbors, and then complained, by the way, that a significant number of refugees and illegal migrants end up on the other side of the Rio Grande. You ain't seen nothing yet, Donald. You ain't seen nothing yet on either of those two cases. We'll be discussing with Angelo Giuliani, Angelo in China, who's not in China, but in Venezuela. Bad luck for him, but at least he's able to bring you eyewitness accounts of what's happening in Venezuela as they now wait for the declaration of war, the kind of ranting, rasping declaration of war that Hitler made against his neighbors in the lifetime of some people actually watching this show tonight. There have been disturbing signs all week that the United States is slipping out of control, certainly slipping out of legality, slipping out of democratic control, slipping out of the Constitution of the American Republic, but slipping out of control in all kinds of ways. It began by the entirely unsolved murder of two students at Brown University, where the sirens weren't sounded, where the CCTV wasn't working, and where an unknown assassin entered and murdered two young people in the prime of their lives in their own classroom, in their own university, for which their parents had paid $100,000 a year in tuition fees. The Keystone Cops cannot be compared to the antics of the authorities, university, and police in Providence, Rhode Island. There has never been a more chaotic, a more shambolic, and a more utterly absurd and ridiculous response to the murder of two innocent students than we have been watching all week. The principal of the university was with his husband in Israel, but dashed back in time to completely bamboozle and confuse the parents of the children in the school, the teachers, the public. Nobody knew what the principal was saying. And we thought that was bad until we saw the police chief, until we saw the mayor, the ruling elite in an elite state of the United States, covering one of the elite Ivy League universities of the United States, were suddenly exposed as bumbling fools, and two children paid with their lives for it. The assassin has not been identified. He hasn't even been clearly photographed. Even in a $100,000 a year school, they had no CCTV in the building because, hey, it was the old building. They've only got CCTV in the new building. So we've no idea what this man looks like, but I have a very strong feeling that the same man murdered one of the world's top nuclear scientists in his own home in Boston, Massachusetts. The wizard professor of nuclear science of MIT was murdered, and the authorities have no idea by whom. Let me turn to one of the most profoundly disturbing, though I'll admit it had massive comedy appeal. One of the most disturbing, deranged, unhinged occasions I have ever seen in watching Donald Trump's presidency now for a total of 5 years. I thought it couldn't get any more ridiculous, and it would be a laughing matter if it weren't so deadly serious. The bull in the china shop, Donald Trump, metamorphosed in front of our eyes into the cuck in the china shop, being humped for Hanukkah by Miriam Adelson and by Alan Dershowitz, about whom more in a minute, and above all by the bear. Don't gay people have a classification of a kind of gay man? Don't they call him a bear? Well, the bear was Mark Levine. Mark Levine took charge of Donald Trump on the stage last night. He pulled him and pushed him around like he was a wimp, like he was a schoolboy, as Mark Levine hugged him, put his arm round his shoulder, arm round his neck, and told him he had the responsibility to go for 4 more years. He told Donald Trump in front of the world, "You are the first Jewish president." And Trump whimpered. "It's true. It's true," he said coquettishly. The bull became a cuck, humped for Hanukkah. And Miriam Adelson, she whispered in his ear, to him and hundreds of millions of people who now have watched it all over the world. "I've checked," she said, "with Alan Dershowitz. You can run for 4 more years. You must run. I will give you the money." She's the first lady. She's effectively the president, as her late husband, Sheldon Adelson, was in Trump's first term, according to Trump himself, who told us that Adelson had him on tap, could drop in anytime he liked, ask him for anything and receive it in exchange for $250 million. It's cheap, that, you know. I mean, it's cheap at the price. It's seriously bargain basement prices for the Golan Heights, which, as he now points out, is worth hundreds of billions of dollars because of the precious energy resources underneath it. And he says, sotto voce, to the world, I should have asked him for something in return. It's cheap at the price for recognition of the annexation in defiance of the entire world of the holy city of Jerusalem, of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, of the burial place of Christ himself. It's cheap at the price. 250 million, as Trump himself said last night. 250 million ain't what it used to be. So who's Alan Dershowitz? You may well ask. Well, he was in the room. Alan's here, said Trump. I saw Alan. Alan's in the room. Who's Alan? Alan. Who is he? Well, he's only the lawyer of Jeffrey Epstein. He's only the guy who's been on 1,000 television shows defending Jeffrey Epstein's reputation. And he's only the Alan that Virginia Giuffre says in her book raped her so violently that she was bleeding from every orifice. That's Alan. That's Alan Dershowitz, whose legal advice Trump just accepted in public, on television, that he can run for 4 more years, though that will not be the last word on that matter, any more than his declaration of war
on Venezuela this evening will be the last word on Venezuela. Angelo Giuliani coming up after this short break. Don't miss it.
Want a second Vietnam War? That is the blunt warning now coming straight from Europe as the United States escalates its pressure on Venezuela. With U.S. warships tightening the noose around Caracas and President Donald Trump declaring a total oil blockade, President Nicolas Maduro says his country is being surrounded. But Maduro is not standing alone. Russia and Belarus have now moved firmly into his corner, rejecting Washington's claims and warning that the U.S. is walking into another catastrophic foreign war.
I see the United States of America's interest in Venezuela. I understand Trump in many ways because Venezuela is nearby, like Ukraine is near Russia. Therefore, there's interest there on many issues. I'm absolutely certain that all issues, all the wishes of the United States of America can be resolved today in an absolutely peaceful way.
Lukashenko openly draws a geopolitical parallel that Washington will not like. He compares America's pressure on Venezuela to Russia's own strategic concerns in Ukraine, arguing that proximity and influence drive great power behavior. But he says the path Trump is choosing is reckless, unnecessary, and dangerous, insisting that negotiations, not blockades or missiles, are the only way forward.
War won't lead to anything. Yesterday, I told John Cole about this. I told him it will be a second Vietnam. Do you need that? You don't. Therefore, there's no need to fight there. You can negotiate there.
Lukashenko then dismantles Washington's legitimacy argument. He dismisses U.S. refusal to recognize Venezuela's elections and turns the accusation back on America itself. In unusually blunt language, the Belarusian leader mocks the U.S. electoral process and questions how Washington can lecture others on democracy while facing its own contested results.
Venezuelans conducted elections for their people, for themselves, and the results are known. There are no other results. What, were you counting votes there instead of the Central Electoral Commission? No. Well, it's not for Americans to count votes in Venezuela. Remember when Trump was thrown, cheated in the last elections? Ballots were found under your fence, you voted by mail. Your elections were 100% falsified when Biden won, and you threw Trump to the sidelines.
On the core U.S. allegation that Venezuela fuels America's drug crisis, Lukashenko is equally dismissive. He argues drugs are a global problem driven by demand, not something that can be destroyed with military force. According to him, missiles, sanctions, and blockades will only deepen chaos, not stop trafficking.
You won't defeat drugs with missiles. This is war, this is struggle. You correctly started this fight against migration and against drugs. Trump deserves credit for raising this topic. But you can't defeat this with missiles. We need to negotiate. We need to determine joint measures of struggle.
Lukashenko also personally defends Maduro, rejecting claims that the Venezuelan leader is involved in narcotics trafficking. He describes Maduro as strong, resilient, and unwilling to flee under pressure, warning that war would only unite Venezuelans behind him and turn the country into another prolonged battlefield.
I don't think that's the case. Maduro is not a drug addict. I know that for sure.
From Caracas, Maduro responds with open defiance. He calls Trump's oil blockade piracy, accusing Washington of behaving like a colonial power seizing resources by force. As U.S. naval pressure increases in the Caribbean, Maduro urges workers across the world to resist what he calls legalized plunder and signals that Venezuela will take the confrontation to the United Nations.
So, all oil workers and all workers in the country must organize the strength of the working class in all ports in the world, throughout all the international working class, to protest against piracy of those who believe they have a letter of marque to steal the merchandises of the world. The workers should say, no to piracy, no to piracy.
Posts. And so in the last few days, he shocked the entire world with his response to the brutal murder of Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle. Now is following it up with one of the most unhinged remarks he's made about Venezuela yet. We could put up this Truth Social post. We'll read this entire thing. He says, Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. I'll pause on that to note, are you really invoking the Spanish here? Like, what are you doing? He says, it will only get bigger and the shock to them will be like nothing they have ever seen before until such time as they return to the United States of America all of the oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. Yes, Venezuela stole our oil, land, and other assets. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these stolen oil fields to finance themselves. the horror, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping for the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking. The Venezuelan regime has been designated a foreign terrorist organization. Therefore, today, I am ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and criminals that the Maduro regime has sent into the United States during the weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, or other countries to rob, threaten, or harm our nation, and likewise will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, or any other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald J. Trump, President of the United States. I don't understand how Venezuela could return land to us promptly. I understand the oil thing. Like there was a meme during the occupation of Iraq that said, how did our oil get under their sand?
It beats me.
But however it got under there, we're going over there and we're taking it back.
Someone's got to find out.
I understand the oil part. The land? How did Venezuela take our land? Jesse Waters, we talked about, I think it was last week, said, South America is ours. It's in the name, America. Maybe that's what he means.
It's not that hard. It's America.
Now, ironically, Trump recently seized Venezuelan assets. They seized an oil tanker. We seized Citgo. Like we took their oil company. Now we're going to. Now they took our land.
I mean, also another part of that where he's saying, on the one hand, Maduro sent criminals into the United States during the Biden administration. On the other hand, Maduro is a vicious dictator. These two things are in conflict because what's actually happening is that Maduro is a dictator and people fled Maduro to come into the United States, which is why there's debate among the Republican Party over whether or not to grant asylum to people who, in the case of many Venezuelans, not all of them, actually is pretty sound for asylum, fleeing the Maduro regime. There were real reasons for people to be fleeing the Maduro regime, just as though there were real reasons for people to be fleeing Cuba over the last several decades. And so on the one hand, Trump is acting as though this was intentionally set up by Maduro to infiltrate the United States. But on the other hand, Maduro is so bad. Well, if Maduro is so bad, then it stands to reason people are going to flee into the United States, which is exactly what happened. It's similar to the trafficking narrative that they're trying to build. Of course, I think there's pretty significant evidence that there are state actors in the trafficking, and many people would argue there were state actors on our side in the trafficking as well. Of course. But that's the argument the United States government is making. But to say that this was intentional, that the migration from Venezuela into the United States was an intentional invasion, infiltration. They're doing the same thing with drugs. And actually what's happened is that people are poor and desperate and are trying to make money or trying to get to a better country. And so that actually confirms the administration's argument about Maduro being a dictator. But of course, they're trying to have it both ways.
And already a couple tankers apparently have been turned around because they're nervous about getting caught up in this American-Spanish Armada, which is throwing the Venezuelan economy into complete and total turmoil. Like it was already deeply struggling under this incredible tightening regime of sanctions that we have going on there, and as well as the collapse of oil prices over the last decade. Which was kind of propping up the Chavista socialism project. What that's going to do is create, like you said, an outflow of migration, as well as create like starvation and suffering and misery. And
which there's plenty of already.
And create instability. Part of this, there's a right-wing movement going on now in South and Central America. You've had the right-wing win elections in Ecuador, Honduras, Chile, Bolivia recently, and a significant, non-trivial amount of that is there were like 8 million Venezuelans, who
getting into Chile,
poured out of into lots of other countries. Like 500,000 or so came to the U.S.
Yep,
it's another 7.5 million went elsewhere around, and that generally throughout world history has created kind of a right-wing pull. So when I first saw this news, I was like, Maduro, you want to call him a dictator or not, he's offering to step down in exchange for like lifting of the sanctions and not drone striking him, and offering to let American oil companies come in. Like he's basically saying, what do you want?
Well, he doesn't want what Trump is threatening to bring down right now.
He doesn't want to be killed.
Yeah,
and so why? Like I don't understand why Trump won't just say yes. Like okay, you get your regime change, you get the oil, you get everything. But you don't get, I guess, a war. The only thing I can think of is, and this is like, no, can't be what he's doing. Like maybe he misses a border crisis. Like the border is very calm right now. And maybe to Trump, he needs a crisis at the border. And so he's like, oh, I need to create an enormous amount of instability and suffering in Venezuela so I can drive more people to the border. And then in 2026, point to the caravans of the people at the border and be like, Democrats, I don't know quite how you finish that equation, but Democrats, scary brown people, you have to vote for me. It hasn't worked in the past, like when he had the big caravan in 2018 that didn't help him. What on earth is he doing?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Maduro has said his counter offer, part of it is allowing his like kind of him to handpick a successor who would reign in power for a couple of years, right?
And while there's elections, yeah. And that successor would not run for re-election.
Right. My guess is that if there was any chance of Donald Trump himself cutting a deal with Maduro, that's probably a brick wall in the negotiations. But I think that's a simpler
They're just going to put the Nobel Peace Prize winning Machado forcibly on the throne? Like, no.
But that's what...
She has no base at all.
But that's what I was going to say. The simpler explanation is that you have to think about this as President Marco Rubio as opposed to President Donald Trump. And President Marco Rubio doesn't want, like, knows that the United States, to paraphrase the Zelensky conversation, holds all of the cards here, except for the American people largely not wanting this, but wants to make a point and wants absolutely no quarter, wants absolutely no remnant, which is impossible, but wants absolutely no remnant of the left, the socialist left, or the whatever you want to call it in Venezuela.
Like, it's a country that has a left.
Yes. And has convinced Trump. I mean, we saw just a couple of days ago, Trump declared fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction, that this could lay the groundwork for potential military action in Mexico. Because if you're declaring fentanyl WMD, there's all kinds of legal questions about what that actually means, what that actually does, but that's laying the groundwork for Mexico. That has nothing to do. I mean, we're talking about cocaine in Venezuela. And so that's I think that's the best guess is because Trump does like making deals, but I think he's basically outsourced this to Marco Rubio.
And about half of, so if we manage the transition, then we can approve, who becomes, interim president leading into the elections, and then we can get somebody who's friendlier to the United States. If we don't manage the process, if we just drive some kind of chaotic regime change, about half of Maduro's deputies are much friendlier to China than they are to us.
Yeah, and that's why...
And so you might get one of them instead.
Which is why I think Rubio wants to do a total takeover.
With what? Like, who's going to... Like, Machado and what army? Like, you're really going to... Like, you're going to occupy Venezuela?
I don't know if
with the U.S. Army.
Part of the Susie Wiles, we'll talk more about this in a second, but part of the Susie Wiles Vanity Fair story, I'm sure this jumped out to you as well. She's saying, we know who's on those boats. We have the CIA. I'm paraphrasing it, obviously, but she says that to Chris Whipple in the Vanity Fair article. And with what army is a great question, always has been a great question. Could have learned that lesson during the Bay of Pigs, but I imagine intelligence coming from the CIA, which we know has been authorized to operate on the ground in Venezuela by the president, probably saying, you can do this, because that's what happens every damn time. You have the people, you have the weak links in the military, you can do it. And that's my best guess as to why there's the full bravado for complete and total regime change, is that they're once again convinced that it's doable, and that anything short of that just gives a foothold leaves a foothold for China and Iran and the new axis of evil.
And meanwhile, Trump is going to get somebody killed in the air, put up C2. So for the second time, civilian aircraft nearly collided, this time with a U.S. Air Force tanker, because all of these American Armada planes are flying around the Caribbean with their transponders off, not communicating with air traffic controllers. And as he said, it's the largest force maybe ever that's been in there. And so you have civilian aircraft constantly going through there. And, it's a big sky, and hopefully that none of them go down, but this is extremely reckless and dangerous, and nobody is asking for it. Like, he hasn't even bothered to try to lie much about it. This whole like weapons of mass destruction fentanyl thing is like offensively like lazy. Like, this is what you like.
It is.
Maybe it's like, we can do whatever we want.
Well, yeah, and I think the best way to think about the Venezuela policy is just, again, President Marco Rubio. I think Trump is not as interested as Marco Rubio is in this Venezuela regime change. He's been brought on board with it because he can use it from a kind of PR perspective to say this is the crackdown on drugs, even though that is going to be digested by every most Americans to be related to fentanyl, and this is clearly not related to fentanyl. So anyway, all that is to say, the tripwires right now, when you have CIA operating on the ground in Venezuela, when you have the Armada, as Trump put it, that is, we are in the middle of a recipe for escalation, and that Americans could be dying in battle over Venezuela.
And
Possible.
Americans like could crash into the sea.
Yes. Yeah.
And they took out another drug boat, alleged drug boat, just recently. And meanwhile, Hegseth is saying he will not show the video that he is so proud of, where they executed these 2 survivors. And he says absolutely the right battle decision. He keeps calling it a battle, not a battle. They're like basically unarmed, and you're sitting in like Florida, hitting them with the drone.
They're not coming and shooting at Americans. They are, by their own admission, they're trafficking cocaine, allegedly trafficking cocaine,
and without outboard motors to get to the United States. Like they're going somewhere,
Suriname or wherever,
Mexico, somewhere. They're not going to they're not making it to the United States with that.
Yeah.
Eventually, maybe they will. A lot of like cocaine users are hoping they do. It's
right,
like, bro. Like, this is what we do here in the United States. Why are you killing our suppliers?
But to compare it to kinetic battle,
right? And so he's so proud of it, and he would make the decision 1,000 times again. But no, you can't actually see the footage of it. And we've destroyed footage of similar strikes.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
Bananas, let's try and make it a record poll. Which is the greatest threat to world peace, Israel, Islam, or Trump? Me, I'd be voting for Trump, especially on a night like this. Let's hear what the seer, the sage, Gerald Celente of Trends Journal, publisher and founder of Trends Research Institute. Let me start, if I may, dear Gerald, with my commiserations. Your country seems to be going to hell in a handcart. The FBI, once renowned throughout the world, they used to make TV series about it. It's revealed as a Keystone Cop outfit run by a bug-eyed clown who's running around on the FBI's dime, following his girlfriend at concerts. You've got 2 now very sinister murder cases in Rhode Island and in Boston, and not a dicky bird of a clue as to who carried out these two murders and if they were linked. And small matter, you've got your president about to illegally declare war on Venezuela. Wow, what a time to be an American.
Well, you called it a country, and that's what it is. You got it?
No comment.
So here's the deal. Here's the deal. Let's go back, which nobody talks about. Talk about Venezuela. Let's go back to 2019, 2020, when Trump was president. And let's go to Google it up, his State of the Union address. He declares that Maduro, the president of Venezuela, is a socialist dictator, and that the United States will restore peace, etc., and that Maduro is illegal and he will be smashed and broken. All right? had nothing to do about the BS about their dealing drugs. And then what no one talks about in the prostitute media, because that's all the mainstream media is, they're prostitutes. They're media whores that get paid to put out by their corporate pimps and government whoremasters. This little boy, Juan Guaido, is the real president, Trump said, of Venezuela. And he and 59 other countries are going to make sure that he becomes president. Everybody's forgotten about this. And all the members of Congress, and you got to put in ASS, it's Congress, all stand up and give that Guaido a standing ovation. And he stands there, and it was like you were saying about all these little arrogant generals and admirals with all their little gold buttons on, dressed up like in costumes, like it's still Halloween. He got this little piece of crap sitting next to him, Guaido, in the U.S. Congress over there with all his medals on. And every one of the scumbag Congress men and women in our country stand up and gave him a round of applause. Now, you think the United States would have invaded Iraq, Libya, and Syria if their major export was broccoli? It's about stealing the oil and the natural resources of Venezuela. And I want to make this really clear. No outrage, zero outrage against the BS that spewed out of Trump's mouth when he was running for office in 2024. We want to have peace on earth all over. Hey, yeah, I just bombed Iran. Oh, only 112 bombs over Somalia. Hey, I'm a peace candidate, all right? Oh, how about I forgot Iran? One after another, now killing innocent people with no proof on little power boats 1,500 miles from America. Hey, they got drugs in there. We got proof. You don't kill people if they got drugs in there. You bring them to court. All right, but it goes on. You ready? That was on September 25th, 2024. Trump said that. Quote, we're going to have peace through strength. We will not have to fight. Okay. That was on October 12th, 2024. This is when he's BSing and running for president. I'm not going to start a war. I'm going to stop wars. October 20th, 2024. I want immediate peace. January 20th, 2025. I'm moving quickly to end wars, settle conflicts, and restore the planet to peace. I want peace. Said the piece of crap on January 25th, 2025. Where's the outrage
Gerald,
of this guy lying his way into office?
He did. He lied his way into office. That much is clear. And that actually has turned out to be the least of his sins. And I'll come back to that in a minute. But maybe you could ask Judge Knapp for me what Trump meant when he said last night that Venezuela must return all the oil and the land that they have stolen from us. I mean, as I've been making the point, at least Rumsfeld, when he said it's not our fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries, at least he was acknowledging that the oil was under other people's countries. Trump last night declared that the land and the oil in Venezuela belonged to the U.S. What does that even mean?
That's what I said. You think we're the same thing with Iraq and with that little scumbag that just died? What was his name? That was with Halliburton. That was under the
Cheney,
when we invaded
Cheney.
Iraq under the Bush administration. What was that guy's name? Penis Cheney. I can't call him a dick. Penis Cheney. Oh, with Halliburton going into Iraq. Again, it's the same thing. Again, there's that great book, War's a Racket. I was looking for the comment here about from Smedley Butler, who wrote the book.
Yeah.
And it was said, it was about going, and here it is. You ready? War is a racket.
Yeah.
It always has been. It is possibly the oldest, easily the most profitable, surely the most vicious. It is the only one international in scope. It is the only one in which the profits are reckoned in dollars and the losses in lives. War's a racket. Nothing else to be said.
Yeah, and always has been. God bless the memory of Smedley Butler, the only general in the U.S. Army ever to tell the truth. But we're now at the end game, aren't we? If he starts this war tonight, as they say he's going to, what happens next, Gerald? Are people going to flock to the colors to go and fight in the jungles of Venezuela, or what?
People believe the crap that they sell. There's this little jerk I mentioned, that Penis Cheney on the Bush, little Georgie Bush, pair of cojones smaller than a mothball, little arrogant, moronic daddy's boy. After 9/11 happened, we're going to get that guy Osama bin Laden dead or alive. Afghan war, longest war in American history, killed hundreds of thousands of Afghans, cost us trillions of dollars. 90% of the people swallowed the crap spewing out of the mouth of that little boy, all right? They'll swallow the crap. They'll make up a false flag attack, and the people will believe it. One of my lines is, when all else fails, they take you to war. Oh, what preceded 9/11? Oh, the dot-com bust. Oh, yeah. Matter of fact, we had forecast that in the Trends Journal when it was a quarterly. Now it's a weekly. In the autumn of 1999, we said it would bust by the second quarter of 2000. Oh, the NASDAQ went down only 80%. United States is in a recession. Hated little Georgie Bush. 9/11 happens, boop, a 180. Go back to the Great Depression. Yeah, history today. Right here for anybody, mainstream. The Great Depression is going on. Again, when all else fails, they take you to war. You ready? On July 26, 1941, President Franklin Roosevelt seizes all Japanese assets in the United States in retaliation for the Japanese occupation of French Indochina. Hey, French Indochina. Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, you're calling it French Indochina? Oh, yeah, we're robbing and pillaging up in Algeria, Morocco. Hey, we got the French Foreign Legion. You ready? The United States was joined by Britain and the Dutch East Indies. Dutch East Indies? What the hell are the Dutch doing up there in Indonesia? Oh, we're stealing, robbing, and pillaging. And you ready? The result? Japanese lost access to 3/4 of its overseas trade. 3/4 of its overseas trade and 88% of their imported oil. All right? They only import 100%. Okay, so you cut off their global trade. They can't get any oil, and you stole their money. I can't understand why they bombed Pearl Harbor. I've never been able to figure that out. They don't tell us this. They're going to pull the same crap with this. The United States economy is going down the crapper. Look at the numbers that came out with the people lost their jobs and how they keep, after they pull out the lying numbers each month, then they revise them, how bad it is. Again, in the United States, the 10 richest people in the United States got $700 billion richer last year. This turned into Slavelandia. You had it again. It's not what you like, what you want, what you wish for in trend forecasting. It's what is. I'm a Bronx guy. I know New York City. All right. They just elected this little boy of nothing that nobody ever heard of. Mondani, 34 years old. Never heard of the guy. The mayor of the biggest city in America. How come? because the people are broken, busted. All right? That's how bad America is. And by the way, this is very important. This is Generation Z, which equals Generation Zero. They got no dough. They're broken, busted. What happened in Nepal? Generation Z. Oh, what's going on in Kenya? Generation Z. Oh, they just overthrew the government of Bulgaria. Who did it? Generation Z. And what about Tanzania, Morocco, Madagascar? One after another, Generation Z's taking to the street. Generation Zero, broke and busted. When all else fails, they take you to war. That's my greatest fear. And you mentioned, I heard some of it, these arrogant little clowns that are talking about how the people have to prepare for war in the UK and throw an FAU and a C in that UK with the jerks over there, and in England and in Germany, all telling the people to get ready for war.
And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, of course. Gerald, one other area I wanted to touch on with you is what I called at the beginning of the show, the bull in the china shop became the cuck in the china shop at the Hanukkah festival last night. He was humped for Hanukkah in front of all the cameras, first by Miriam Adelson, then by proxy by Alan Dershowitz, and then in what could only be described as a humiliating pastiche by the big guy, Mark Levine. It was really quite humiliating. I felt embarrassed for the United States. It's quite clear that Israel's running Donald Trump, aren't they?
Oh, you mentioned Adelson. What did the old man give him? $100 million? Remember that? Hey, I'll be back when he was president the last time. Hey, we're moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, all right? Hey, you know that land you stole from Syria? Hey, it's yours, all right? And what did he get? Another couple of $100 million from Marion Ellison when he ran for office. Look at that little Huckabee jerk in there. One little clown after another. The United States ambassador to Israel. God told Abraham or Moses 3,500 years ago that this land belongs to the Jewish people. Oh, and these clown boys call themselves evangelical Christians? Hey, that's son. What Christ you talking about? How about thou shalt not kill? Thou shalt not steal. And save your fairy tale that God told them this 3,500 years ago. Shove it up here. You know what? Hey, what did God got lockjaw? Never spoke to anybody before or after? Oh, and all you people that call yourselves Christians, hey, Christmas time. I know you're concerned about how the markets will do with the maybe holiday sales and what Santa Claus will bring. How about the birth of the Prince of Peace? How come you little scumbags aren't talking about peace, huh? At the birth of Jesus Christ. And you're selling your crap. And where are all the religions? Oh, Christmas time, you believe in this stuff? How come you're not out there for peace? Oh, Santa Claus is coming to town. I forgot. Yeah, they lie. They say they're believers in the Prince of Peace, and they don't do crap for peace.
No, they're the antithesis of a peace presidency. But the humiliation last night, for me, was off the scale, and not least when Levine said to the world that you, President Trump, are our first Jewish president. And he said and repeated for a second time, it's true, it's true. Is he Jewish? Nothing wrong with that, but it would be wrong if he lied about it. It would be wrong if he allowed all these evangelical half-wits speaking in tongues, laying on hands, and touching him as if to touch the hem of his garment when they all thought he was a Christian. What is he?
How about Joe Biden? Called himself a Zionist. And how about that little clown boy that was the Secretary of State? Anthony Blinken. I went to Dalton. I went to Harvard. Don't you know my daddy was? He was the ambassador. My uncle was the ambassador. That little arrogant clown. Oh, yeah. I come to Israel not only as a Secretary of State, but as a Jew. I could give a shit what religion you belong to. And I don't want to be getting involved in a religious war. And again, in your Trends Journal, going back to the spring of 2006, Crusades 2000, all right? 2006. While the seeds of the Crusades 2000 is implanted in full view of the world, and all those watching could have anticipated the eventual harvest, the memories of what happened and what would occur have been fogged by rigid ideology, fanatical religiosity, patriotic fervor, government propaganda, and ulterior motives. When we first forecast Crusades 2000, we wrote, quote, "The formal battle lines for the new crusade had been drawn when Israel was created in 1948. Regardless of what England's reasons or intentions were, self-serving or otherwise, Crusades 2000 was set in motion in 1917's Balfour Declaration that laid the foundation for Israel. Quote, His Majesty's government. I'm going to stop right there for a second. You talked about the clown boys wearing those little gold things. How about this king clown with all his golden jewelry and the other stuff? If the king was Italian, they'd call these murderous bastards a mafia. But I'll keep going. Said the king said His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and we will use our best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this objective. All right? The Balfour Declaration brought to you by the Rothschilds. You stole the land from them. I got to believe this crap. Oh, and
well, no,
who
you
are
don't.
the who
And
are
you
the
don't.
ones and who are the ones that have been the presidents of Israel since they invented this thing? Eastern European Jews.
Yeah.
Not Semites. Oh, Ashkenazis. Oh, yeah. Ashkenazi. Ashkenazis.
Well, look, von der Leyen said tonight, Gerald, it's the truest word she's ever spoken. She said Jewish culture is European culture. And she's right about that. But that would, of course, make Israel a European colonial outpost in the Arab world, in the Middle East. It cannot be both European and Middle Eastern, even if they are allowed to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest. Gerald, you've been marvelous, but you made me lose my bet. I bet you'd get through the whole interview without swearing. You let me down there just at the death. Gerald Celente, Trends Journal publisher and founder of the Trends Research Institute. It's priceless, by the way, the Trends Journal. Anyone who's not reading it is a fool. Gerald.
Coffee. Follow me.